Perfect. It is 1 o'clock, so we're going to start this webinar. So hi all, and welcome to the Los Angeles and Orange County Regional Webinar. My name is Ashley Yee, and I'm CalRecycle's SB 1383 Implementation Manager. Before I turn it over to Julia Doloff, who will go over the logistics of the webinar, I wanted to introduce you to everyone who will be presenting and or available to respond to questions. From CalRecycle, we have Kara Morgan, representing collections and edible food, Julia Doloff, representing collections, and who also helped put together all of these webinars, so thank you, Julia. Scott Beckner, Michelle Dewey, and Kristen Pidcock, representing procurement, Alan Elizorio and Tricia Moore, representing compliance and enforcement, and then Julia and Gracia Diaz will also be helping with the Q&A portion. Also, HF&H Consultants is joining us today on our panel to respond to questions as well. We've invited them to participate because HF&H managed the development of the 4 model CalRecycle tools, which include the model franchise, the model ordinance, the model procurement policy, and the model food recovery agreement, so they could respond to related questions. They're also available to provide insight on how cities, counties, and JPAs across the state are tackling SB 1383 based on their experience assisting dozens of jurisdictions with compliance needs, including the development of SB 1383 action plans, aligned franchises, processing agreements, ordinances, and more. So today, Tracy Swanborn is here with us from HF&H. Tracy is the senior manager with HF&H, and she managed the development of the 4 model tools. She's actively tracked 1383 through the rulemaking process, developed multiple tools to support jurisdictions' compliance, and have prepared or are in the process of preparing action plans and aligned franchise agreements and ordinances for a numerous amount of cities and counties throughout the state. So thanks so much, Tracy, for joining us today. So now I'll turn it over to Julia for logistics.
Thanks, Ashley. So I'm just going to pull up my screen again. So just give me one moment. All righty. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. So today, each team will be providing a 10 to 20 minute overview presentation of the regulatory requirements for each topic. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A session in which CalRecycle staff will unmute participants to allow you to ask your questions over the webinar. So please use the instructions shown on the slide for the Q&A session. If you're watching the webinar via the CalEPA broadcast, you may email your questions to the SLCP inbox. If you are using the GoToWebinar platform, please type your question or a summary of your question into the question pane. Staff will unmute participants in the order that questions come in. Note that you will need to unmute yourself on your end when asked to by CalRecycle staff, and please state your affiliation before asking your question. We will try to get to as many different people as possible today, and CalRecycle staff may be responding to some questions in writing through the GoToWebinar platform, so please review the question pane periodically for those responses. And for those watching via the broadcast, we will be verbalizing these questions and responses as well, so you can hear them. Questions and comments regarding the merit of the regulations were responded to during the rulemaking period. Therefore, today we are going to be focusing on questions or clarifications regarding implementation and tools only. If we do not get to your question today, we will follow up with you at a later date. And with that, I will hand it off to Kara Morgan to cover the Edible Food Recovery Program requirements.
Thanks so much, Julia. As part of California's larger strategy to combat climate change, Senate Bill 1383 established an edible food recovery goal. No less than 20% of currently disposed edible food must be recovered for human consumption by 2025. I would like to clarify, this is not a goal for individual jurisdictions or individual food facilities to recover 20% of their edible food. Rather, it is a statewide goal that Californians must collectively achieve. I would also like to clarify that while there is a baseline for measuring organic waste, there is not a baseline year for measuring edible food recovery. So CalRecycle will likely be using the 2018 Waste Characterization Study to help measure the baseline for edible food recovery. So why is the statewide goal so important? We see many examples of wasted food rather than feeding people that are hungry. Since COVID, the number of people that don't have enough food to eat has doubled and tripled. This is another reason these regulations are so critical at this time. This law was designed to reduce the global warming superpollutants like methane, which is up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Recycling organic waste and recovering edible food is a fast track to combating climate change. It's critical that we address climate change now. Californians are resilient, and we have to work together to achieve these goals, and CalRecycle is your partner. While the regulations take effect in 2022, jurisdictions have to plan now. CalRecycle understands that not every jurisdiction will have everything in place by January 1, but each jurisdiction must be making the effort. Next. I will discuss the edible food recovery policy components in the 1383 regulations. First, I will discuss how edible food recovery is defined. Second, I will discuss the direct requirements on commercial edible food generators, who they are and what is required. Third, I will cover the requirements for each jurisdiction in California to assess and plan for edible food recovery to provide adequate access so that commercial edible food generators can recover the maximum amount of edible food. And fourth, I will discuss the requirements on jurisdictions to implement edible food recovery programs. Next. So what does edible food mean? It means food that is intended for human consumption. We also specify in the regulations that nothing requires that edible food be recovered if it does not meet the food safety requirements of the California Retail Food Code. So just because the food is intended for human consumption does not mean it is safe to recover. It must be intended for human consumption and also must meet all the food safety requirements that are specified in California's Retail Food Code. We also specified in the definition of edible food that it is not solid waste if it is recovered and not discarded. This is so very important. This is material that is before the trash container. This is food. If we look at the US EPA's food recovery hierarchy, source reduction and waste prevention is at the top, followed by recovering food to feed people. This is what we want to do with this. This is not waste. The photos on the left were taken from one of CalRecycle's waste prevention and rescue grant recipients. These are some of the recoveries that they have been doing in K-12 schools and school kitchens. It's amazing work. Showing a contrast, the food on the left is from an unsupervised open buffet line where customers serve themselves. Most county health departments would not allow that food to be donated. Next. So the second policy I want to cover is that there are direct requirements placed on commercial edible food generators, where these generators are required to recover the maximum amount of edible food that would otherwise be disposed and recover it for human consumption. These are the generators that you see on the slide. Tier 1 must start recovering edible food January 1, 2022, and Tier 2 must begin January 1, 2024. We separated the generators into two tiers for a couple of reasons. Many of the Tier 1 generators already have food donation programs in place, so they are participating in some kind of food donation program already. So it's not going to be as heavy a lift for them. The Tier 1 generators typically have larger amounts of edible food available to donate to food recovery than the Tier 2 generators. And they typically have less prepared foods available, so it's a lot of fresh produce or grocery items. Whereas the Tier 2 generators do not have food donation practices or programs in place typically. So this might be new to them, and they have smaller amounts of edible food, and a lot of them have prepared foods, including hot prepared foods. The infrastructure and capacity that's needed to be able to recover that edible food is lacking in certain areas in California. So we wanted to give jurisdictions, commercial edible food generators, and food recovery organizations and services an additional 2 years to prepare for compliance and help build capacity where additional capacity is needed for the Tier 2 generators. Next. The key requirements for the commercial edible food generators are to arrange to have the maximum amount of their edible food that would otherwise be disposed be recovered for human consumption through a contract or written agreement, either with a food recovery organization or service that will collect their surplus edible food or self-haul that edible food to a recovery organization that will accept it. So I want to talk for a moment about self-haul. We added this into the regulations based upon feedback from the California Association of Food Banks. It's very expensive for the organizations and services to recover this edible food. They are often dependent on philanthropic or government funding and grants, and many do not have sustainable funding. So it would help them if generators are self-hauling. However, the self-hauling has to be included in that contract or written agreement. Under no circumstances should a commercial edible food generator self-haul edible food without permission from the food recovery organization or service. This is absolutely critical to protect them from donation dumping. There's also nothing in the regulations that prohibits a food recovery organization or service from charging a fee for the services that they are providing to the generator. Many of these food recovery organizations and services are doing much more than recovering food. Some are providing information about the federal tax deductions that generators can claim. And there are some that also provide data on the pounds of food that have been recovered, which can help inform the purchasing practices of that generator so they can prevent excess edible food. Next. To help commercial edible food generators to comply, CalRecycle with HF&H Consultants developed a model food recovery agreement. So if a generator calls a jurisdiction and they don't know how to start or where to find an agreement, this tool can be shared. The tool is highly customizable. The tool is intended to help commercial edible food generators to comply. The regulations are silent on what needs to be included in the contract or written agreement. So although we provide this as a model and it is customizable, it does not have to be used, but it can be used. And we hope it is used as we want to assist with compliance as much as possible. Next. The county and each of the jurisdictions located in the county are required to work in collaboration to collect critical information that will help produce an impactful edible food recovery capacity planning analysis. The county will lead this effort by coordinating with the individual jurisdictions as a group. Just like for organic waste capacity planning, the county is responsible for collecting the edible food recovery capacity planning data from each jurisdiction, submitting the report to CalRecycle, identifying any jurisdiction, including itself, that does not have enough edible food recovery capacity or plan to acquire that capacity, and informing that applicable individual jurisdiction that does not have the planned capacity about the timeline for submitting a schedule to CalRecycle. The county is not responsible for ensuring and enforcing that each of the cities conduct the edible food recovery capacity planning that is required. I'll discuss this in more detail in a moment. As we discussed previously, the coordination might be done in different ways depending on what the needs are, what the availability of resources are. The key is that the county and the jurisdictions located within the county should develop a plan for the tasks and timelines so that the county can submit the report to CalRecycle on time. The ideas on coordination with capacity planning are that the jurisdiction should collaborate on a plan, decide who will contact the food recovery organizations and edible food recovery services that collect material across the county. For example, maybe the individual jurisdictions would contact the smaller edible food recovery organizations that support only that particular jurisdiction. Next. The county and the jurisdictions located within the county must do the following. First, they have to estimate the amount of edible food that will be disposed of by commercial edible food generators located within each of the jurisdictions. In April or May, CalRecycle will be providing capacity planning calculators for both organic waste and edible food, and guidance and training to help you with estimating disposal. To calculate this, one of the first steps will be to identify the Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators that are located in your jurisdiction. CalRecycle will be providing guidance in March to jurisdictions on approaches that you can use to identify your Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators. I would like to note that the capacity planning requirements do not require estimates to be exact or absent of any error or uncertainty. Next. The next step is to identify existing, new, and planned capacity at food recovery organizations and food recovery services that are available to commercial edible food generators located within each of the jurisdictions within the county. This is critical information that must be collected in order to be able to identify if additional edible food recovery capacity will be needed to recover the amount of edible food that's estimated to be disposed by the commercial edible food generators that are located within that jurisdiction. CalRecycle will be providing jurisdictions with a survey tool to collect information from food recovery organizations and food recovery services. You can begin contacting your food recovery organizations and services to find out how much they collect now, if they could collect more, if they currently collect from any of your Tier 1 or Tier 2 commercial generators in your jurisdiction, and what would be needed to expand if that's needed. Because this effort requires the county to submit a report to CalRecycle, each of the jurisdictions within the county that are contacted by the county staff must respond to the request for information within 120 days. This timeline ensures that the county staff can submit all of the capacity planning information to CalRecycle in the time required by the regulation. If this timeline is not met, the county does not need to include edible food recovery estimates for that jurisdiction in its report to CalRecycle. However, the county must include in its report the jurisdictions that did not provide the necessary information to comply with the requirements. This is needed because the county can be penalized financially for failing to estimate edible food recovery capacity. And this clarifies that the county is not liable if the cities located in the county fail to respond within the given time frame. Next. The jurisdictions in the county are required to engage with important entities, being the edible food recovery organizations and edible food recovery services that play such a critical role in edible food capacity planning efforts. This engagement will provide more accuracy in determining the edible food capacity needed to meet the goals required by statute. Based upon feedback from stakeholders, it's critical that each of the jurisdictions are working closely with their edible food recovery organizations and services to understand what infrastructure is available and the capacity that's needed. With this collaboration, these organizations can inform the jurisdictions about what's needed to create any new or expanded capacity, such as types of equipment, staffing, facility needs, etc. Food recovery organizations and services that are contacted by a jurisdiction shall respond to the jurisdiction within 60 days regarding available and potential new or expanded capacity data. This helps jurisdictions to conduct a collaborative and impactful edible food recovery capacity planning analysis in a timely manner. Next. So again, to reiterate, the county's role is the same for organic waste and edible food recovery capacity. They are to establish a collaborative approach to this planning, including setting timelines, identifying tasks, and determining how and what each jurisdiction will do to contribute to the effort. They have to aggregate the data from all of the jurisdictions that are located in the county, identify if any jurisdiction lacks capacity and is not planned for that capacity, report to CalRecycle, and inform the applicable jurisdiction that has not sufficiently planned for capacity of their responsibility and time frame. If a jurisdiction's data determines that there is not existing, new, or planned available edible food recovery capacity, the county is required to notify each jurisdiction that lacks this capacity before the date that the county submits the report to CalRecycle. That jurisdiction must submit an implementation to CalRecycle that demonstrates how it will ensure enough capacity to recover the edible food currently disposed by its commercial edible food generators by the end of the reporting period. The implementation schedule must include timelines and milestones for these planning efforts, This includes how the jurisdiction will obtain funding for edible food recovery infrastructure. This might be done through modifying franchise agreements or demonstrating other means of financially supporting the expansion of edible food recovery capacity. It also includes identifying facilities, operations, activities inside the county that could be used for this additional capacity. In developing the implementation schedule, the jurisdiction is required to consult with food recovery organizations and services regarding their existing, new, or planned capacity that could be accessed by the jurisdiction's commercial edible food generators. If CalRecycle is informed that a jurisdiction failed to provide the required information to the county, we will take enforcement action if necessary. I would also like to note that there are no waivers for edible food recovery capacity planning, so all jurisdictions must plan and submit the required data. Next. In addition to planning for edible food recovery capacity, the fourth policy requirement is that jurisdictions are responsible to implement an edible food recovery program. This includes the jurisdictions educating commercial edible food generators about the requirements, as well as providing education to all generators about edible food recovery. The jurisdictions will need to increase commercial edible food generators' access to food recovery organizations and services. This is going to be particularly important in the more rural areas. We want to be sure that these commercial edible food generators can locate these organizations and work with them. Jurisdictions will also need to monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance. This ensures that these generators are complying with the requirements that I was just speaking about. We also included language in the regulations about how jurisdictions might fund their edible food recovery program. For example, LA City has built this into their franchise agreement, and we are seeing other jurisdictions consider this approach. In our model franchise agreement tool that we developed with HF&H Consultants, we addressed this as well. Next. Part of the education of commercial edible food generators includes for each jurisdiction to maintain a list on their website of the food recovery organizations and services that are operating in the jurisdiction, and they must update this list annually. The list must include the name, address, contact information, collection service area, and types of food accepted for each food recovery organization or service that is operating in the jurisdiction. And I would like to clarify, the list does not have to include all food recovery organizations and services that are operating in your jurisdiction, but only that a list is maintained. So the list should consist of food recovery organizations and services that have a good track record of safely and efficiently recovering edible food that will help meet the jurisdiction's edible food recovery needs. Part of the jurisdiction's education to generators is where the list can be located. Next. Going back to the requirement that jurisdictions must monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance, the inspection program must ensure that the generator has a contract or written agreement for edible food recovery. It must ensure that the generator is maintaining its records. This includes the established frequency of collection, types of food donated, and the amount of food in pounds donated per month. So based on the review of the records, the jurisdiction can determine that the generator is maintaining the records, has a contract or written agreement, and it looks like the generator is donating the maximum amount of edible food. So really what you're looking for to verify is that the maximum amount of food is being donated. You're looking for red flags. So for example, if the inspector is conducting a review at a supermarket and their record indicates that they donated only 2 pounds in the last month, then most likely they are not in compliance with donating the maximum amount. In that situation, the inspector would ask if they are donating the maximum amount and verify that they say they are and that the records indicate that. Inspections of Tier 1 commercial edible food generators and food recovery organizations and services begins in 2022. And then inspections of Tier 2 commercial edible food generators must begin January 1, 2024. Each jurisdiction will need to decide which staff will have the delegated responsibility for conducting the inspections. For example, some jurisdictions will contract with their county health department to have health inspectors to conduct the inspections and provide education. Some will utilize their public works staff to conduct the capacity planning and provide the general education to all generators. But I want to clarify that the ultimate responsibility for ensuring compliance rests with the individual jurisdiction. I say that because we've been hearing across the state that environmental health departments want to be involved in this, or that jurisdictions would like environmental health to be involved. So these inspections could be coupled with existing mandatory inspections that health departments conduct. I would also like to point out a jurisdiction shall conduct a sufficient number of inspections to adequately determine overall compliance. A jurisdiction or its designee, such as the County Department of Health, may prioritize inspections of entities that it determines are more likely to be out of compliance. There is not an annual requirement on inspections for Tier 1 or Tier 2 commercial edible food generators. The annual inspection requirement in Article 14 of the regulations is for solid waste collection compliance reviews. We provided this flexibility knowing that many jurisdictions would contract with their county health department, and they would include this in their existing mandatory inspections on their frequency. And to require an annual inspection of all edible food generators would overwhelm jurisdictions. This slide is a summary of the key dates. Again, by January 1, 2022, jurisdictions must establish their edible food recovery program. I do want to clarify that education of both Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators does need to begin in 2022. The reason for this is because for many Tier 2 generators, this will be something entirely new, and they will need time to establish their programs, including having a contract or written agreement in place, training their employees, setting up those relationships. In 2024, the jurisdictions are required to take enforcement action against non-compliant entities. Next. This slide is a summary of the key dates related to edible food recovery. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the stakeholders that have worked with us to inform the development of these regulations, and to each of you for beginning the planning that is necessary so that we can successfully achieve our goal to provide edible food to those that do not have enough to eat and deal with our climate emergency now. Now I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Kara. So I just want to give a very quick reminder of how the Q&A session is going to go. So again, to ask a question, if you're watching via the broadcast, please email your question to the SLCP inbox. To ask a question via GoToWebinar, please type your question into the question pane, and CalRecycle staff will unmute participants in the order that questions come in. Just want to remind folks as well that some of the questions in GoToWebinar have been responded to by CalRecycle staff. For the sake of those who are not in the GoToWebinar platform, we will be reading those questions and responses out loud. So if we ask you as an attendee to unmute yourself to re-ask your question, that's why we're doing that. So with that, I will hand it over to Gracia for our first question.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. Our first question is from Dana Kitchens. If you can please unmute yourself to ask your question and state your affiliation.
Sorry, okay, did I unmute myself?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Dana with Food Cycle Los Angeles. And I'm just still, I guess I'm just still trying to figure out how all of this all fits together. But I guess my question was, what does compliance look like on the Tier 1 level if individual donors aren't responsible for reaching that amount? I guess you kind of answered that with the inspections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dana, I'll respond, and then you can let me know if there's like more to it. But you know, the way we have set up the regulations, the first 2 years is intended for educating generators. So you know, jurisdictions can begin enforcing through notices of violation starting in 2024. But the intention is really to get generators educated. So for example, if you had a Tier 1 generator that's supposed to be recovering edible food, say it's starting 2022, and they're not, then the inspector who is interacting with that Tier 1 generator would provide educational information. here are the food recovery organizations. You need to contact them. You need to set up an agreement with an organization to recover your edible food. It's certainly CalRecycle can assist also if a jurisdiction needs that help. So does that help answer the question?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so our next question is going to come from Nazreen. Nazreen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation.
Hi, my name is Nazreen, and I am a fellow with the City of Signal Hill. And we're currently in the process of reaching out to our Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial food generators. We identified some of them, and one of the questions was, do dollar stores and 99-cent stores count as Tier 1 food generators when they meet the 10,000 square feet requirement? Because some of them have edible, like fresh vegetables and packaged foods in the stores. And then my second question, the second part of my question was, we are a very small city and we don't have any edible food recovery organizations within our jurisdiction. But we have edible food recovery organizations in the city next to us, which is Long Beach. Therefore, when it comes to capacity planning, do we have the authority to fund, like obtain funding to increase the capacity of these food organizations outside of our jurisdiction?
Yeah, and Nazreen, those are great questions. Thank you. So first, I did mention in the presentation that in early March, we will have guidance on identification of Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators. The dollar store question is one that comes up all the time. And in our guidance, and I don't have my language right in front of me, but the idea with grocery stores is there is the 10,000 square foot, but there's also the aspect of are they primarily engaged in the sale of, fresh produce, canned goods, etc. So, what we have in the guidance document that you will see is that it is going to be the jurisdiction's call to determine, primarily, that means for the most part, using the just general dictionary term. So a dollar store likely will not fall under the definition or into your Tier 1 grocery store category if you think about looking at the whole dollar store, maybe they have some foodstuffs, but they primarily sell all of these other items. So that will be up to you to make that determination. But in most cases, what we're seeing are that dollar stores would not be considered a grocery store. But, it does seem like various chains are changing all the time. So you could see dollar stores becoming primarily grocery stores and, shifting in that way. So it is something to pay attention to. So you can let me know if I answered that part of your question. With capacity planning, absolutely. You can provide funding to expand edible food recovery organization service capacity. It does not have to be for organizations and services that are actually located in your jurisdiction. So we would strongly encourage you to start collaborating with that city next door. I think you said it was Long Beach, and their food recovery organizations and services. And I think the two of you teaming up makes a lot of sense. I know that the County of LA has already been starting to work in this space. And so we can follow up and give you contact information if you need it for the county on the work that they're doing in identifying food recovery organizations and food services through their food drop program. Hopefully I got that right, LA County. Did that get it for you?
In that case, we're going to move on to the next question. The next question is from Rosie Ledesma. If you can please unmute yourself to ask your question and state your affiliation.
Hi, I'm Rosie Ledesma at the City of Woodland, not LA, Orange County, but hopping on earlier than later for our regional area. Anyways, my question is, what if food generators want to take on the task of directly donating food to community members themselves? Like they didn't want to go through a food recovery organization, maybe especially if there's a fee involved, but they just wanted to do some kind of donation on a weekly event where they, or daily event or something where they directly donate them to community members. How would that work? How do we capture that? And is that even allowed?
Well, it certainly is allowed. So there's nothing that prohibits an commercial edible food generator from even, giving edible food to their employees or to the community. The key is that tier 1 or tier 2 commercial edible food generator does have to recover the maximum amount of their edible food. So, it's likely they're still going to need to have a contract or written agreement with a food recovery organization or service to capture and collect, the maximum amount of their edible food. Ashley, is there anything else you'd like to add to that one?
Yeah, and just to reemphasize, it's edible food that would have otherwise been disposed of. So if you were already doing this service, it may not technically be applicable, but Kara is correct. We don't want to prevent food that is already being donated from not being donated because we have to do 1383. So another thing that is pretty interesting is you do have to have a MOU or a contract in place, and it could also be kind of with yourself if you're a little creative. So you could be the generator, but you could also be the donator. So for example, I always like to use college campuses for some reason. But if a college campus is generating edible food that would have otherwise been disposed, and they may have a food pantry or a food bank on campus, to help their employees, to help hungry students, etc. You could always have that contract with yourself. So I hope that clears it up a little bit. If not, always happy to talk more offline about this scenario, but it is one that we get a lot, where it's like, well, I just want to feed my employees, or I just want to feed my community members, like you said. So are always happy to hear that one out and work, through scenarios with you.
Yeah, a lot of restaurants already do that, allow their employees to take home the edible food or to eat edible food on their shift. So hope that helped, Rosie, and glad you're here.
Thank you.
All right, our next question is coming from Jason. Jason, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your questions.
Hi, everyone. Quick question. I'm from Placer County. Just wanted to ask, I heard you mention city and jurisdiction. Are they one and the same?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. In the regulations, a jurisdiction is defined as a county, a city and county, which is San Francisco situation, a regional agency, or actually, excuse me, not in the jurisdiction definition, separate capacity planning, or a special district that provides solid waste collection services. For capacity planning, it is all of the jurisdictions that are located in the county. So that could be the county itself, an incorporated county, that could be the cities, any special districts that provide solid waste collection services, and any applicable regional agency if there is one. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then the second question here, I saw in the slide presentation that a state agency could potentially be a tier 1, tier 2 generator. So would the jurisdiction have an oversight over those agencies in that capacity?
Yeah, that is a great question. In the guidance that will be coming out in early March on identifying tier 1 and tier 2 generators, we do have a whole section on identifying state agencies as well as other non-local entities and helping you to determine if they fall in. We're not aware of any that will fall in the tier 1 category, but many will fall in the tier 2 category. So there's a couple things. Jurisdictions are required to educate any non-local entity or local education agency. So that includes state agencies, federal facilities. You are also required to plan for the capacity, both organic waste and edible food capacity for those generators. You are required to provide, an implementation for your edible food program is ensuring that all tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators, even state agencies, for example, have access to food recovery organization services to help them recover the maximum amount. Where the difference comes into play is that you do not have to take enforcement action. So you do have to inspect all your tier 1 and tier 2, but you do not have to take enforcement action on a non-local entity or local education agency. CalRecycle will have that oversight and conduct any enforcement. With that said, if you were to conduct an inspection of an entity, say a local education agency, a school, for example, and you found that they were out of compliance, then that could be communicated to CalRecycle, and then we would initiate the enforcement action. Did that help, Jason?
Sure does. Thank you very much.
You bet.
The next question is from Konya Vivianti. I believe they don't have a mic, so I will be reading the question. Their question is, has CalRecycle contacted major supermarkets about these requirements or the California Grocery Association?
Yeah, Ashley, do you want to speak to our collaboration? Because we've done a lot.
Yeah, of course. So I did respond in the chat, and yes, our edible food team, which not only composes of Kara, but also Kyle Pogue and Martine Boswell, they've been in contact since the beginning of the development of these regulations, especially with the California Grocers Association, I think, and large supermarkets. So these folks are well aware. We're in constant communication with them. We also have talked to the California Food Bank Association. We are planning on doing a separate webinar with them as well, and the food banks. So we have just been in constant communication in the past 4 years with these folks to really get their feedback on how to develop 1383 and be successful in getting edible food to hungry Californians.
All right, so our next question is from Christine Shen. So Christine, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, I was wondering how jurisdictions are expected to verify or inspect food recovery for large events and venues.
Yeah, Christine, you and I may have to go back and forth so I can best understand your question. But for particularly large venues and events, they also are required to ensure that food is being handled safely per the California Retail Food Code. So that, you know, again, I think depending on how you do the inspections, whether that's, you know, contracting with Department of Environmental Health, or if your jurisdiction is doing the inspections, you know, it would be figuring out, you know, when those events happen, and depending on who's doing those inspections, the timing of those inspections. So many of those already receive food inspections to ensure that they're handling food safely. So it likely would be tied into that existing on-site inspection that's already happening. Did that help?
Yeah, so for large events, they're also getting the food inspections.
Well, you know, that's a really good question, Ashley, and we may have to tee this up. My understanding is there are requirements for them. I don't exactly know what type of inspection that they have. So I'd probably have to circle back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. The next question is from Nazreen. If you can please unmute yourself to ask your question.
My question was, is there a threshold for maximum amount of food recovered?
There is not. So it is the dictionary definition of maximum. Did that help, Nazreen?
Yes.
All right, so our next question is from Colleen Foster. Colleen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
I was eating my sandwich. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
I provided a suggestion that it would be great if CalRecycle engaged with the larger California Food Policy Council, but then also to do a roadshow with some of the local food policy councils across each county, because those groups capture the smaller food banks that are going to be impacted and hopefully benefit from the aspect of this law, and they're not necessarily directly associated with the larger food banks. So yeah, just a suggestion. But I did have
Oh,
And I can
Colleen, I
give
was going to say
an
that's
extra
a great. Sorry, Colleen. I was going to say that's a great suggestion. And if you have any contacts, I am so happy to pass those along to the edible food team and start scheduling these presentations. We want to do our due diligence in getting out there, hitting everyone who will listen to us. So if you have any of these contacts, or if anyone on this webinar has any of these contacts to these people that you want us to present to, and this is not just for edible food either. This is for anything 1383. Happy to go out and present. We really want folks to be successful in 1383. So thank you, Colleen.
No problem. Well, we appreciate you out here. And then the only other question I had, because I think this falls more in line with tier 2, is are you guys meeting regularly with the California Restaurant Association on SB 1383 implementation? And that obviously goes beyond food recovery, because restaurants will be impacted with organics diversion. I'm just wondering, that would be a great entity to also organize with. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Who's next? And we will definitely, we have been engaged with the California Restaurant Association, and we will be sure to step it up again this spring as well.
Thank you for that, Cara. We do have another question from Jerry. If you can please unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation. Okay, I will go ahead and ask the question. The question is, how about event centers? We have 170 events a year. Half of them have food. What would the requirement be? Same as restaurants?
Yeah, Jerry, yes, it is the same requirement. So for each of those 100+ events that you have, if they meet the definition of a large event, then they are required to recover the maximum amount of their edible food, have a contract or written agreement with an edible food recovery organization or service. So your jurisdiction, would need to be informing them such that come 2024, when they're required to start recovering the maximum amount, that they're prepared to do so. So if there's any assistance we can provide with that as far as educational information, et cetera, we're happy to help you with that.
All right, so our next question is from Nazreen. Nazreen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
So if the city has no place to send food in the jurisdiction and can't make a supermarket enter into an agreement with someone else, how do we work around this situation or accomplish this?
Can you help me out a little bit more, Nazreen? So ultimately, the commercial edible food generator is responsible for recovering the maximum amount of food. However, if the jurisdiction has not secured adequate access to capacity, that commercial edible food generator can demonstrate that they have an extraordinary circumstance. This is provided for in the regulations. Bottom line is that it is the requirement on the jurisdictions to expand capacity, to identify what the capacity need is, and to plan to expand that. As I mentioned in the presentation, this could be in the form of providing additional funding to existing food recovery organizations or services to help them expand capacity. It could be establishing relationships with a new entity, for example. So there's lots of different ways that a jurisdiction could go about it. Ideally with capacity planning, the jurisdictions, hopefully as a region, are working towards identifying what the needs are and collaborating together, because many food recovery organizations and services kind of cross jurisdictional lines. So I think there's truly another real positive aspect of the collaboration with respect to capacity planning. So does that help identify? Or
it does help a little bit, but my follow-up question will be, as a jurisdiction, where do we get the funding from to increase this capacity?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to depend on your jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions and food recovery organizations and services have availed themselves of the CalRecycle food waste prevention and rescue grants, for example. Some jurisdictions, as I mentioned, for example, LA City, through their franchise agreements, are having a certain amount of money provided to expand edible food recovery organization services. I do know of some jurisdictions that are using funding, whether that's general fund funding, et cetera, to help fund that expansion. So, I think it's going to depend on your particular jurisdiction and kind of what your mechanisms are. But first and foremost, the first step is identifying, who your generators are and how much is estimated to be disposed and what is the estimated available capacity. Then kind of what that difference is, and can plan accordingly. There are a lot of jurisdictions, and we can follow up with you directly if you'd like, that are using a variety of food recovery organizations and services. So there's a lot of innovation also in this space. Of different types of food recovery organization services are coming in to meet the need. So I think it's just going to kind of depend on your particular jurisdiction. But I'd love to have the local assistance team follow up with you, being in Signal Hill, and connecting you also with LA County staff who are working on this space as well.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. I think the local assistance market development team is actually listening in, so they're writing this down as we speak.
Great. The next question is from Karen Lee. If you can please unmute yourself and state your affiliation.
Hi, Karen Lee with the City of Artesia. My question is, the city allows our community centers and our picnic shelters to be rented out for private parties. Are these parties required to meet the food recovery requirement as well?
So Karen, it's going to depend. So what you need to do is to go into the definitions for the tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators. For large venues and events, it gives a certain threshold. So what you're describing likely would not fall under a tier 2 commercial edible food generator, but it would be important for you to look at those definitions to see if it meets any of those categories. Does that help?
No.
No.
No. Like somebody was throwing like a party with 200 people in it and they were getting it catered. Would that trigger, food recovery?
No, it would not. Caterers are not included in tier 2 definition, for example, and because you've got 200 people, that doesn't meet the threshold for a large venue and a large event. So again, I really encourage you to look at our guidance that is going to come out in March on identifying tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators. You will see in that guidance, it answers those kinds of questions. So, and if not, follow up with your LAMD liaison and we will answer all of your specific questions about, particular tier 1 and tier 2 generators. We have a team that's geared up to assist you with specific questions related to, is this a tier 1 or tier 2 or not? And they can help you with that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so our next question is coming from Colleen Foster. Colleen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm ready. I finished my sandwich.
Great.
I had two questions. So, CalRecycle, you guys have mentioned, potentially contracting with the county health department to add food recovery to their health inspections, because currently they do health inspections for food service entities that would fall into these tiers. Do you have a specific example of this happening? So which county is doing that? And then do you have an example of what a contract with the county looks like? So other counties, like I'd like to push that obviously in my own county.
Yeah.
So my team's not doing those inspections, but maybe I'm paying the county to add time to do those inspections.
Yeah, Colleen, if it's okay, we'll circle back to you and we can circle out to all webinar recipients. I do believe, for example, Waste on OC is doing this. And I'll have to follow up to see if we have any examples of actually those MOUs or contracts between a jurisdiction and county health department. So we'll get back to you on that.
And then
Perfect.
Kara, I'm not sure if Tracy has.
Oh, yeah.
FNH, do you have any clients that are doing that, Tracy?
I don't know if any that have entered into contracts. We've got several trying to work with the counties in this regard, but I don't know of any that have actually got any sort of agreement or commitment in place yet.
Because yeah, the biggest challenge I've seen is the counties like we are overwhelmed with all the regulations we have to inspect for, so we're not going to take yours on. But I'd love to keep pushing the needle there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colleen, if our Team Edible can be of service in those conversations with the county health department. But anyways, we'll follow up with you.
Perfect. No problem. Thank you. And then the last question, and it's been a while since I got into the details of this, but if a city does not inspect special events or special events that fall into the tiers, fail to recover edible food, would city be forced to impose financial penalties against the event organizer after the event? So I've had this happen with recycling. I have a big event. They say they do their little solid waste management plan. They say they're going to do recycling and order services. And then I happen to go by the event the day of and they didn't do any of that. But the event's done, right? So, and I don't have penalties against them. And they're like, oops, shame on me. But with SB 1383 and the enforcement penalties, is there an enforcement penalty in regards to this?
There would be. Ashley, do you want the enforcement team to answer that, or how would you like to?
Sure, yeah. The enforcement team could step in first and then we'll chime in.
Yeah, so good question, Colleen. So, as the regulations state, each jurisdiction is to develop and create their inspection and enforcement program per the regulations and have that in place. Leading to, from what I understand what your question is, the special events would fall under, if the special events fall under tier 1 and tier 2. And then what you're stating is, after the fact, before the fact, they say before the event, they are going to have the recovery program. And then after it's found out that there is no recovery and everything was going into the waste. I think that's going to be built off of the jurisdiction and how they set up, and that could be looked at as part of their permitting process or the approval of the event. That could be built in as part of their program for the enforcement of those particular events. But I think it can be a case-by-case basis on how the jurisdictions develop their program to incorporate that, so they don't find themselves in a position where they're finding after the fact that no diversion was occurring on site. I guess, in a lot of instances, it would be hard to go after any event after, and the trucks are leaving, and you're trying to flag them down for any penalties. But that could be looked at with regards to having something on the front end and developing that, so they don't run into those type of instances.
So there's the rule has no financial penalty against the special event. If the city failed to do some sort of program and really failed to make events accountable beforehand and maybe after the fact, would the city be on the hook for a penalty for not fully implementing this aspect?
Well, the regulations state that the jurisdiction is to implement an inspection and enforcement program. So as part of the enforcement program, beginning Jan 1, 2024, jurisdictions are to enforce and have that as part of their programs, NOVs, the notice of violations and penalties upon any violators on that aspect anytime before. What the regulations say, it's, as Karen mentioned, it's the education, outreach, and ensuring. So I hope if that answers your question. But really, it's going to be up to the jurisdiction to develop their inspection and enforcement program built around to that makes the most sense for that particular jurisdiction.
Thank you. Might be something I'll touch base with you guys again, but thank you. Helps quite a bit.
Great. Oh,
let's do one more question. We're getting up to 2 o'clock, so we do have to switch over to procurement. So, Gracia or Julia, if we could do one more question, probably from Priscilla. And then for all the other questions, we do have them documented down and someone will get back to you.
Great, thank you, Ashley. So the next question is from Priscilla. I will be reading the question. For food service provider, is there a requirement for its size? Some providers may not be big and do not generate much surplus food or even food waste. Please clarify. Thank you.
Sure. There is no threshold for food service provider. When our guidance comes out in early March on identifying tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators, we have, I think, what I consider some really helpful guidance and clarification on food service providers. So I think you will find that very helpful. It clarifies that caterers are not considered a food service provider. It clarifies that you're identifying food service providers that are located within your jurisdiction, not just operating. So lots of food service providers come in and out of jurisdictions, and it would be truly impractical for jurisdictions to have to identify them. So you really are looking for food service providers that are located in your jurisdiction. And then they may go out elsewhere or even in your jurisdiction and provide that service. So when you see the guidance in March, I believe that will help answer your questions. And if not, feel free to let us know, and I'll have one of my team follow up with you on your particular specific examples.
And then Kara and I will continue to answer questions in the chat as we have time. But I do want to move on to the procurement presentation to give them their full hour. So thank you so much, Kara, for doing that. And Julia, I'll turn it back over to you or to Michelle. I'm not sure which one.
We'll
Hey,
go straight to
Ashley.
Michelle.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashley and Julia. All right, so we will go ahead and dive right on into the procurement requirements. Today, I will be giving you a brief overview of the procurement requirements outlined in the SB 1383 regulations. As we did want to leave the bulk of today's session open for Q&A, this slideshow is a bit condensed. However, if you need further information on the procurement requirements after today's presentation, please feel free to check out our webpage and contact us with any questions. The procurement requirements are designed to help build the markets for the products coming out of organics recycling facilities and to help close the loop on recovering and using the organic waste diverted as a result of SB 1383. Today, I'll discuss two distinct procurement requirements for jurisdictions: to procure recovered organic waste products and recycled content paper. First, I'll talk about recovered organic waste products. These are shown here and include mulch, compost, energy products from anaerobic digestion, including transportation fuel, electricity, and gas for heating, and electricity from biomass conversion. The regulations do outline specific details as to what makes these products eligible for procurement, so I do encourage you to take a good look at those definitions and requirements. But the key is that these products are made from California landfill diverted organic waste, and that they are made at specific types of facilities or operations. And jurisdictions will be required to undertake this procurement. For the procurement of these products, jurisdictions are defined as cities, counties, or cities and counties. So how much of these products should cities and counties procure? CalRecycle will assign an annual procurement target to each jurisdiction based on their population. The formula you see here is from the regulations and demonstrates how a jurisdiction's procurement target is calculated and how conversion factors are then used to convert this procurement target into quantities of end products. A jurisdiction's population is multiplied by a per capita procurement factor of 0.08 tons of organic waste per person, and this results in a jurisdiction's procurement target in tons of organic waste. Every 5 years, the jurisdiction's procurement target will be recalculated to account for changes in their population. The conversion factors outlined in the regulations are then used to convert this procurement target into quantities of recovered organic waste products. And these are determined by multiplying the conversion factors by the target. We did build in multiple options into the procurement requirements to help provide jurisdictions with flexibility in meeting their procurement target. And in keeping with this theme, jurisdictions can customize their procurement and can choose what mix of products shown here that they'd like to procure to meet their target. So they could meet their target entirely through one product, such as mulch, or through a mix of products, such as mulch and compost. Next slide, please. This slide further highlights additional procurement options that were built into the regulations. First off, jurisdictions can meet their procurement targets either through direct procurement, in which the city or county is directly using the product themselves or giving it away, or through a direct service provider, in which the city or county is contracted with a separate entity, such as a hauler or contractor, to procure and use these eligible products on behalf of the jurisdiction. So an example of this might be as if a city had a direct service provider relationship with a landscaping company to procure and use compost and mulch in their projects, and requires in this contract that the compost and mulch meet their regulatory requirements. And this could be on behalf of the jurisdiction and help them to meet their target. One thing important to emphasize is that procurement does not necessarily mean purchase. A jurisdiction that produces its own eligible products or receives it in another way, such as free delivery of compost from their hauler and uses that end product, can count this towards their procurement target. It's also important to note that procurement can be a paper transaction. The products that are procured do not have to be produced within the jurisdiction, made from their own organic waste collected, or even used within the jurisdiction. So theoretically, a jurisdiction could purchase eligible compost made from anywhere in the state and use that towards their target. Lastly, CalRecycle has built a mechanism into the regulations where their procurement target can be lowered to ensure that a jurisdiction does not procure more recovered organic waste products than it can use. This was included because the intent of these requirements is not to force jurisdictions to procure more than they have a need for. This mechanism is triggered by a jurisdiction as part of their annual report, and to support and to be eligible for a lower procurement target, a jurisdiction would need to showcase and report that their previous year's procurement of energy products, including transportation fuel, electricity, and gas for heating, in that previous calendar year is lower than their calculated procurement target. So that's one more option built in for flexibility. Next slide, please. This slide shows just a few examples of how a jurisdiction may use these products to meet their goal. The regulations don't define the required end uses of these products, but these are some common examples we may see. A jurisdiction might choose to use compost or mulch in things such as city parks or gardens as soil amendment or erosion control measures. They may also host compost or mulch giveaways, and this can count towards their target. Transportation fuel from anaerobic digestion may be used to fuel a jurisdiction's own city bus or waste fleets, or if they have a direct service provider relationship with an entity such as their franchised waste hauler who is using the fuel on behalf of the jurisdiction, this could also count towards their target. A jurisdiction can use gas used for heating applications to heat any needs, such as on-site space heating, cooking, or to heat their equipment, such as their digesters. And electricity from biomass conversion or from renewable gas from anaerobic digestion may be used to power any of the jurisdiction's needs, such as on-site at the organics recycling facility itself, or any other buildings or infrastructure used by the jurisdiction or their direct service providers. Jurisdictions are required to maintain records so that CalRecycle can verify compliance. These records include information of the entities from whom products were procured, a general description of how products were used, and invoices or similar records of procurement for both direct procurement and for direct service providers. Please note there are additional record-keeping requirements outlined in the regulations for certain products, including mulch and energy products from wastewater treatment facilities or from biomass conversion. So I do encourage you to take a look at that section of the regulatory text and ensure that you are meeting your record-keeping requirements. Next slide. The next part of the procurement requirements are for the procurement of recycled content paper. And these are entirely separate from the requirements discussed so far. Unlike the procurement of recovered organic waste products, the procurement of recycled content paper is a blanket requirement for all paper purchases. So there is no target of how much needs to be purchased, and rather all purchases must meet these requirements. This also includes a broader scope of jurisdictions than previously discussed. Rather than just cities, counties, or cities and counties, the paper procurement requirements are also applied to special districts that provide solid waste collection services. The SB 1383 requirements do build upon existing requirements which many local entities already meet, such as the requirement to purchase minimum recycled content paper products. However, new requirements added on are that these paper purchases must be recyclable under the Federal Trade Commission guidance, meaning that a substantial majority of the population where this product is sold does have access to recycling programs for the product at the end of its useful life. And this helps to avoid the landfill disposal of paper products and printing and writing papers, which further supports the organic waste diversion goals established by 1383. Another requirement is that jurisdictions must require vendors from whom they purchase these products to provide certifications of the post-consumer content and that these products are recyclable. There are a variety of paper products and printing and writing paper products outlined in the regulatory text. So I encourage you to take a look for a further listing of what all types of products are included, but it's a wide range, including paper janitorial supplies, cartons, packaging, file folders, envelopes, and most printing and writing paper. And there are also record-keeping requirements for the recycled content paper purchases. These include copies of invoices, receipts, or other proofs of purchase that describe the procurement, and copies of those certifications or verifications from vendors that documents the post-consumer content and that these products are recyclable. This slide gives a timeline for SB 1383 implementation, and you'll see here in red are some of the important dates for procurement. The procurement requirements do become enforceable in 2022 with the rest of the regulations. Rural counties and jurisdictions within rural counties that are exempt from the organic waste collection requirements will not be required to comply with the recovered organic waste product procurement requirements until January of 2027. However, all jurisdictions, including rural jurisdictions, will be required to comply with the procurement of recycled content paper beginning in 2022. Jurisdictions will be informed annually of their procurement target through posting on our website and through direct written notification. Jurisdictions can calculate their procurement target through the formula outlined in the regulations. However, their official procurement target for 2022 will be taking into account newer population data than is currently available. We do expect this population data to become available in May of this year, and CalRecycle will be providing notice to jurisdictions of their official targets following the release of this data, so stay tuned. Next slide, please. There are also requirements included in Article 13 of the regulations for jurisdictions to report annually to CalRecycle to demonstrate their compliance with the procurement requirements. If jurisdictions are procuring mulch, there is a one-time initial compliance report due in April of 2022. And this is the only instance of reporting outside of the annual reports. And this requirement is to report the ordinance or other enforceable mechanism adopted for mulch, outlining that mulch procured does meet a variety of requirements. However, all other reporting for procurement will take place under the annual reporting on the dates shown here. And the reporting will include the amount of each recovered organic waste product that was procured during that compliance year. And if you are implementing a reduced procurement target, you will also need to report those quantities of energy products procured in the year prior. Next slide, please. Lastly, this slide highlights some of the tools and resources that are currently available to help jurisdictions implement the procurement requirements. The procurement calculator tool was recently released on our website and through our listserv. It can be used by jurisdictions to calculate their procurement targets and the quantities of recovered organic waste products they would need to procure to meet this target. It may be helpful to jurisdictions in planning for their procurement and in tracking their progress towards meeting their targets. We did host a webinar on this tool yesterday afternoon. In case you missed it, it has been recorded and will be posted on our website. So stay tuned through the SLCP inbox and our listserv for notification of that becoming available. Another tool that is currently on our website that may be helpful to jurisdictions is our model procurement policy that was developed with HF&H consultants. This is a customizable template for jurisdictions who are planning to develop and adopt a procurement policy. So we do encourage you to check that out. We also have case studies, additional webpage resources, and FAQs on our website, and are in the process of developing additional guidance and resources, as well as FAQs for our website. So please let us know if there are any resources you'd like to see highlighted on our website. And we are continuously adding to our FAQ resources online. So those questions you submit to us through SLCP, through our SLCP inbox and that you asked today do help inform those. So we encourage your questions. Next slide, please. So that's it for my presentation today. Again, please be sure you're signed up to our SLCP listserv. And we recognize this presentation was a fairly quick overview, but if you do need further information, please do check out our webpage and contact us with any questions. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. Great presentation. So this is just a very quick reminder of how our Q&A session is going to go. If you're watching via the broadcast link, please email your question to the SLCP inbox. If you are using GoToWebinar, please type your question into the question pane. CalRecycle staff will unmute participants in the order that questions come in, and you will need to unmute yourself on your end to be able to ask your question out loud. If we cannot respond to your question during this session today, we will respond to you at a later date. So with that, Gracia will go to the first question.
Great, thank you, Julia. The first question we have is from Kasar. If you can please unmute yourself to ask your question and please state your affiliation.
Hi, this is Kausar Faziftar from Los Angeles County Public Works. So my question was about the procurement of the recycled organic waste products. So I understand that the organic waste has to be generated from jurisdictions within the state of California. But as for the facilities that are recycling the organics and creating the products, do those facilities also have to be located within the state of California?
Thank you so much for your question. That's a great question that we do get a fair amount, and we'll be providing a lot more clarity on our website and training materials on a lot of the questions I'm sure we'll be getting today. So the requirements in Article 12 are for the waste that's used to make those products be from California landfill diverted wastes. To just reemphasize, it doesn't have to be from each jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction doesn't have to procure back products made from its own waste. It could be from anywhere in the state, but it needs to be produced at facilities that are outlined in the regulations, and those are all specific to California regulated and specific California regulation permitting, specific permits that are really only relevant to California entities. So take a look at the regulations, but each product has specifics on where it needs to be reduced to be eligible, and in all those cases, it specifies that it needs to be permitted facilities by CalRecycle or otherwise authorized.
All right, so our next question is from Christine Shen. Christine, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, Christine from the city of Malibu. For the procurement target, I was wondering if CalRecycle is expecting us to use a certain year's population.
Great question. Oh, a little bit of feedback. All right, awesome. So the regulations do specify that the procurement target is based off of the most recent population data available from the California Department of Finance. And so for the year of 2022, it will be taking into account, which is the first year of compliance, it will be taking into account population data for the year of 2021, which those estimates are planning to come out in May of this year. And those procurement targets will be in effect for 5 years. So the procurement target for 2022 will be in effect until 2027, at which point that target will be recalculated, again, taking into account the most recent population data available. And we do have that 5-year gap to allow jurisdictions to have time to plan and not to have their target changing every year. But it will be taking into account most recent years data. Hope that answers your question.
And again, CalRecycle will be noticing each jurisdiction on what their procurement target is based on the most recent data. If you wanted to go and take a look at the Department of Finance populations and utilize the calculator that we released a couple weeks ago to run some numbers, you could absolutely do that. Just know that the official population data that's used to calculate the target won't be released until at least May of this year.
Great. Next question is from Stacy. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Stacy Cuevas with the City of Tustin. My question is about your calculator tool. For us, when we purchase mulch, we get a receipt for mulch in cubic yards and not tons. And I was wondering why compost you give an option for tons or cubic yards and mulch is only in tons, and whether or not that option could be added as a conversion into tons.
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, it's, we worked closely with our compost and our organics experts, as well as the Air Resources Board on the conversions. And after doing analysis, it was clear that mulch had a really wide range of bulk density. And so we could really only, in the regulations, we could only include the actual tons as part of our calculations. So basically, the end result is we acknowledge that mulch is more often than not bought in cubic yards, and so jurisdictions just will need to propose a reasonable, defensible conversion and keep it as part of their record when they report their data to CalRecycle in the annual report.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Kristen. Kristen, you can unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so Kristen's question is, what mechanisms are available for cities to procure organics-derived electricity or gas? Local utilities do not appear to offer any programs that cities can opt into based upon our research.
That's a fantastic question, and one that we are really excited to provide additional guidance on in our upcoming updates to our website and FAQs. In short, there are other mechanisms besides working through a utility-based grid mix system through both the direct service provider relationship as well as what we call a paper transaction for energy products. I.e. the relationship may be bypassing the utility that you actually get the electricity from and working directly with the producer of the electricity to account for and to kind of to take the paper, the credit of the green credit of the gas or of the electricity or CNG and have that contribute towards a jurisdiction's procurement target. But we're going to provide a lot more information and guidance on that in the near future.
Great, thank you, Scott. Our next question is from Kristen. If you can, never mind, sorry. It is from Judy. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thanks. This is Judy with 020. I think Scott might have just answered. I had a very similar question. Just at a jurisdiction that I'm working with was looking at having the hauler utilize, procure the fuel requirements, but they just transition their vehicles to CNG. And so wondering if there would be options to purchase credits in lieu of refuse-derived fuel that could count towards the procurement. And it sounds like there are going to be some options to do that.
Yeah, purchasing offset credits isn't something we've done an analysis as far as I'm aware. So I'd like to probably connect with you offline to explore that a little bit more so we can provide adequate guidance to others. Yeah, really what it comes down to is that we're actually procuring products that are made in California from California landfill derived material, and all the record keeping has to be met. So I think the devil's in the details there, but I definitely would be interested in exploring that more with you.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Our next question is from Cynthia. Cynthia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, Cynthia, Mariposa Eco Consulting. So a couple of my jurisdictions have a public fueling station, but they're getting their fuel from like clean energy, which is being brought in from, Arizona. So are they going to be able to get credit for that?
Great question.
Go ahead.
Oh, great question, Cynthia. So as the SB 1383 procurement requirements, they are designed to help support California's landfill diversion goals of that organic waste. Those requirements for these products do specify that the products do need to be made from California landfill diverted organic waste. It does need to be tied to that. So energy and fuel, transportation fuel from out of state that's not being produced from in-state California organic waste, or that's not being produced at California's facilities specified in the regulatory statute would not be eligible.
Okay, and I also have some jurisdictions that have public fueling stations that are tapped into the gas company, and part of AB 32, they have to have a renewable mix. So how do we going to figure that out? The gas company has to have a renewable mix, also part of their AB 32 guidelines. So is there going to be a calculation for that?
It's a good question. This is a very specific procurement requirement that has really no overlap with things like the renewable portfolio standard or low carbon fuel standard. And we've worked closely with ARB to make sure that it doesn't come into conflict with those other programs. In this case, if you're talking about vehicle fuel, there would need to be an arrangement with the producer of the eligible vehicle CNG in California that attributes the production of that gas with the use of or procurement of the gas by the jurisdiction or a direct service provider. And so again, these are great questions about the nuts and bolts of how this might work for energy. It's very wonky because of the paper transaction aspect to how energy is both wheeled and traded, and credits are spun around the state and around the country. So we're going to be providing a lot more detail on how that might work in practice and guidance to that end. So stay tuned. And if you have follow-up questions you'd like to address one-on-one, feel free to reach out.
Next question is from Edgar. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I will go ahead and ask the question. The question is, if a jurisdiction produces its own compost, does the total end product calculate into the procurement target, or only that which the jurisdiction uses for its own need? What about that amount which it sells?
Great question, Edgar. And this is one we do get a lot of. What exactly needs to be done to meet the procurement requirements. So if you do look to our regulations, it does outline that jurisdictions must procure and provide a use or giveaway of the material. So it does need to be tied to that use or giveaway by the jurisdiction. However, there is that option for a jurisdiction to work with a direct service provider to also use that product on their behalf if the jurisdiction does not have a need themselves for that compost and if compost is of interest to them. And I also want to note that if they are producing their own compost, it again is not the amount that's necessarily produced that counts towards their target, but rather the amount that is then used or given away by the jurisdiction that will count.
Definitely, and the direct service provider language in regs is a really it's turning out to be a very flexible mechanism that I think is going to lead to a lot of out-of-the-box thinking. And with the critical thing there is that all record keeping requirements and other requirements and regulations are met, but we're seeing a fair amount of out-of-the-box thinking on this that we're hoping to highlight in future updates to outreach and websites.
Thank you, Scott and Michelle. This is Julia with CalRecycle. I just want to remind folks who are listening in that we have until 3 o'clock today to answer any procurement related questions that you may have. We don't have any more questions in the question pane and GoToWebinar or in the SLCP inbox. So just want to put a reminder out there that we have HF&H on the line, our procurement team, and our enforcement folks. And now I see a couple questions coming in, so we will get to those right now. So our next question is going to be from Kathy. Kathy, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, just wondered how you plan to count the purchase of potting soils. The commercial landscaping does tend to buy materials that are made in California. How will that count toward the purchase goals of the jurisdiction?
Great question, Kathy. So in the regulations, we have our definition of recovered organic waste product and recovered organic waste product procurement targets, and those do emphasize that that these products need to be from landfill diverted organic waste in order to contribute towards a jurisdiction's procurement target. So it would need to be so compost, for example, that is eligible to count towards a jurisdiction's target. It would be the compost that is derived from that diverted organic waste. If compost is mixed with and blended with other additives or other things that are not from landfill diverted organic waste, those additives mixed in would not meet that definition of recovered organic waste products. So it would just be that portion of the compost that would count. So it would be prorated, and a jurisdiction would want to make sure that they do keep adequate record keeping to help support that and demonstrate in their implementation record how much of the compost in those products is eligible towards their target.
Next question is from Deborah. Deborah, if you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. It looks like her audio isn't coming through, so I will ask the question. When purchasing mulch or compost from wholesale suppliers, how do we determine if it meets the California derived standard, and or are the certified composting facilities going to be selling material direct to jurisdictions?
That's great question. You know, again, one of the keys here for meeting the intent and the rule and regulation is verification of the source of the material, that it's an eligible material from an eligible facility, and it's used in California. And then to that end, the record keeping is the bar that a lot of these situations will have to meet. Where we've been in discussions and we've had a lot of interaction with brokers and with suppliers that want to, be able to market these materials, and either who you're purchasing it from or jurisdictions themselves will have to supply that documentation that is from an eligible source, from an eligible feedstock. And so I'm foreseeing that wholesalers and brokers are going to be developing some sort of guidance or kind of independent certifications of some sort that show that it meets the intent of the 13th year procurement regs. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. Not right now. Thanks, Scott.
Or any corrections? Thanks.
All right, thank you both. So our next question is coming from Christine Groves. Christine, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering about the procurement policy itself. Does it need to be adopted by our governing bodies, such as our city council, or is it an administrative policy approved by the city manager?
That's a great question, Christine, and I'm not sure if I have an exact answer on who needs to approve it, but it is optional to have a procurement policy, like on paper, that we have put out a model procurement policy that jurisdictions could use as a template and to have an idea of what that might look like, but it is not a required document to meet the procurement requirements. And Alan just joined, so maybe he has something to chime in.
Yeah, Michelle, I think you're correct. And Christine, I believe it's going to be a case by case situation on each jurisdiction. Every jurisdiction is going to have their own way and how they approve things internally within that jurisdiction. So what one jurisdiction may utilize a city council or utilize the city manager for the authoritative signature for implementing things within a jurisdiction may be different upon another jurisdiction. So would be case by case, I would say, on that aspect.
Okay, thank you. And I should say I'm from the city of Lake Forest. Thank you.
Great. Next question is from Chin. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, hi. This is Chin Hovia. I'm the Vice Mayor of City of St. Gabriel. Our West haulers, they do have it's organic waste site, and they turn into waste into compost, and that is great. But I, keep asking them, see if they can do further approach, regarding the turning to renewable natural gas, especially for their own trucks, and also if they can have leftover and inject to the Southern California Gas Company pipeline and to clean out their natural gas, that will be, benefit not just for transportation, but also for our clean energy policy. So the problem is there's no funding for this type of equipment. The anaerobic digestion equipment, as I understand, one of the sites in Riverside County, and they spent about $60 million for that. So I thought, oh, is there, any funding that they can look for, and they can not just do the compost, but turn into new energy?
That's a great question. Yes, so compost, assuming it meets all the requirements and regs, is an eligible product for this. But if you were wanted to explore going to an anaerobic digestion facility or adding that to your portfolio of how you are managing your organics, our local assistance team and business assistance teams have a lot of resources available to match make, to provide directions for grant funding and loan funding. CalRecycle has administered a substantial amount of grant and loan funding to compost and anaerobic digestion facilities in the past. We don't currently have funding for that in this fiscal year, but we're hopeful to get additional funding in the future. And I do see a lot of consultants and representatives of similar facilities on the call right now. So I bet you'll be proactively reached out to by a few of those. But it looks like Kara would like to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And thank you, Mayor, so much for being on today. Our local assistance market development staff liaison will follow up with you in your city. CalRecycle held a public funding webinar where we went over a lot of available funding resources besides our grants and loans. And there are many that are available to recycling manufacturer companies that want to start projects. Obviously, building an in-vessel digester standalone system is expensive and costly. Many jurisdictions are also exploring collaborating with their wastewater treatment plant to expand the facility to be able to process food waste. So there's probably a lot of opportunities. Our team can follow up with you. We also have a private funding webinar coming up, which I think it may even be tomorrow. And we can give you all of that information as well. So we're happy to work with you. And thank you again for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Thank you so much.
So our next question is coming from Debbie. Debbie, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for holding this. All these trainings, I always learn something new. There's been some confusion, and I just wanted to clarify, and maybe you've said this, but does the recycled paper content count towards the procurement requirements for the city?
Thanks, Debbie. Great question. So the requirements for procurement of recycled content paper are separate from the procurement target. The procurement target is for what we call the recovered organic waste products, which includes mulch, compost, energy products from anaerobic digestion, and electricity from biomass conversion. But the paper procurement requirements are instead a blanket requirement for all paper purchases. And there's not a target amount of products that need to be procured, so that they are separate requirements.
Thank you.
Great. I'd like to pause there real quick. We do have we're getting a lot of pretty basic questions that we have in our FAQs, and I think that Kristen could provide a little bit of background real quick on a number of issues, a number of questions that we get all the time that doesn't seem to be just get asked all the time. So I think we could pause real quick and allow Kristen to give a quick summary of those.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so we've touched on some of these a little bit, but it doesn't hurt to go over this material again. So one of the first questions we typically get is, how can a jurisdiction meet their procurement target? And other questions along these lines include, can we sell a product to meet our target? Or if our organic waste is going to a compost facility that produces eligible products, could that count towards our target? And so the regulations do outline that procurement is achieved through the end use or giveaway of recovered organic waste products. So it is limited to that use or giveaway And it does not simply include the sale of products, and it's not the production of products or sending your waste to compost facilities. The intent of the procurement component is to encourage the demand and the use of these products, because this is where the most environmental benefits are realized. So therefore bringing it, full circle and providing that end use or giveaway will help support the demand and the markets for the use of these products. So I have about 5 questions. So this is the next one we get. So another question we received regarding what can count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target is when there is an entity in a jurisdiction that's using recovered organic waste products. An example of this would be if a local hauler fuels its trucks with eligible transportation fuel derived from renewable gas. Can that count towards the procurement target? So in that situation, it certainly could be eligible, but there would need to be an established direct service provider relationship for this to be an option. So there'd need to be that written agreement or a contract in place defining this direct service provider relationship between the jurisdiction and the end user. So if there's not a written agreement and a relationship established with that external entity, they would not be considered part of the jurisdiction, and this would not count towards the jurisdiction's procurement target. Another question we hear often is, what if a jurisdiction procures a product that is partially eligible? So in other words, a portion of the product is produced from landfill organic waste while part of it's not. So for example, electricity produced from eligible facilities, and those facilities are receiving some eligible feedstocks while they may be also receiving feedstocks that are not landfill diverted. Can those sort of partially eligible products count towards the target? And so in short, only that portion of the product that comes from the recovered organic waste can count. The regulations outline that products that can meet a jurisdiction's procurement target need to meet the definition of a recovered organic waste. So there's lots of other details to look at when providing guidance, but in general, they need to be from California landfill diverted organic waste, and they must be produced at permitted or otherwise authorized facilities or operations. So we need to look at those details and then determine if that portion of the product can count. And if you have specific product examples, you can always reach out to us and we can look at those products and situations a little deeper. Okay, another question that we frequently get is, in what circumstances does mulch count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? So mulch is an eligible product if it meets the requirements outlined in the regulations. So among other things, the mulch must be produced at specific permitted facilities, and it must comply with land application standards. So the requirement for it to be produced at the permitted facility is to ensure that the products are being made from diverted solid waste, as well as helping support those landfill diversion goals of SB 1383. So you may have noticed that chipping and grinding operations are excluded, and this is because the feedstocks typically entering these facilities are not considered landfill diverted, so it doesn't support that landfill diversion goal. And the last question I have here is, under what circumstances can the gas produced at a POTW or publicly owned wastewater treatment facility count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? And there are several requirements outlined in the regulations, but the key to remember is that this renewable gas must be produced from landfill diverted organic waste. So this water treatment facility would need to be accepting eligible diverted organics from specific permitted solid waste facilities or operations. And then the portion of gas produced from those organic waste is what may count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target. So those are some of the questions that we frequently get, but these questions and many more you can find on our SLCP website as well. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful with the general questions, and if there's any others, we'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Kristen. We do have a question from Edgar. I will go ahead and read the question. The question is, if you are trying to create a market for the end product compost, why can the selling of the product not count for the procurement aspect? Or how are you defining creating a market?
You're on mute, Scott.
There we go. Thank you for your question. This is, addressing, the reasoning behind regs, and we want to stay away from those discussions in this venue, but please feel free to see our short-lived climate pollutants rulemaking website for our. There's a number of documents available there, and one that will be available soon, which is our responses to comments, where we addressed a number of these procurement-specific questions.
Thank you, Scott. And while we are waiting for any more questions related to procurement, Ashley and Kara wanted to go back and provide some clarification on an edible food question. So I'm going to toss it over to them.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Julia. And we did get a procurement question in the SLCP inbox, so I will forward that to you now. But I just wanted to clarify, and Kara, feel free to jump in, about commercial edible food generators and large venues or large events, as well as the enforcement aspect too, with basically all of the regs. So if you look at 18991.3, we do mention large venues and large event operators, and if they do not provide food services, but they allowed food to be provided. So in that case or that scenario, those food facilities operating at the large venue or large event need to comply with the requirements of 1383. So that's just to clarify for folks who are talking about maybe.
And Ashley, just to add to that, that large venue is required to make those participating entities comply. So, they need to make sure that if they're having, say, a big event that meets the definition and they've got a bunch of food trucks, right? Then that large event needs to make sure that the food trucks comply with the edible food recovery. So it is a collaborative requirement. Thanks, Ash.
Perfect. Thanks, Kara. And then going back to maybe, I think it was Colleen and your question about enforcement and maybe the after the fact stuff. So in 18995.4, that's about the enforcement by a jurisdiction. So it basically talks about a jurisdiction has to enforce through the action set forth, and there's a list of actions you have to do. They have to enforce basically this whole chapter of 1383 with the exception of prohibited container contaminants, because that's actually laid out in that section for that. So there are enforcement requirements of the jurisdiction to be enforcing specifically for the generators, for the edible food, to make sure that they are complying with 1383. So I hope that helps, Colleen.
Ashley, I'll just add to that, to build off of that. So in the scenario that you presented, Colleen, a venue or an event has ended and you find out that they were not compliant, the jurisdiction starting in 2024 would conduct enforcement action on that particular event. And we think that's important. There are going to be many enforcement actions that happen after the violation has actually occurred, right? And so the jurisdiction will need to follow up and make sure that that's addressed through an enforcement action. So we did want to provide that clarity. Ellen, was there something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you guys are spot on. And then just reiterating, the jurisdiction, specifically jurisdiction shall have an inspection and enforcement program, and it specifically says that's designed to ensure overall compliance. So that's kind of the key term, that their program ensures compliance. So echoing, kind of reiterating what both you and Ashley stated, that reinforces the program.
Pauline, I hope that helps. I don't know if she's still on the line as I'm looking at the attendees, but we could always follow up with her as well. So Julia, I think I sent you the procurement question from SLCP, if you want to take it back over.
All right, thank you, Ashley. So this question is from Allison Burley, and she is from Aurora Environmental Incorporated. Her question is, earlier someone mentioned something about being able to modify procurement for 1 year based on the annual report for the previous calendar year. Could you please provide additional information about this?
Sure, great question. So as mentioned in the presentation, and feel free to go and look at that regulatory text for specifically what it outlines there, but it is taking into account the previous year's procurement of energy products. So it includes transportation fuel, electricity, and gas used for heating. So if the previous year's procurement and use of those products by a jurisdiction exceeds a jurisdiction's calculated procurement target, then that could support them using a lowered target to come to that level of their previous year's procurement. And again, the intent is for including this mechanism is so that jurisdictions don't have to procure more products than they need. And we will be providing more guidance on the website because we do get a question a bit on that mechanism and what that all means and goes into that. So we will be providing more on the website for that as well. But hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
All right, thank you so much. We just had a question pop up from Annika. And Annika, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I've been in and out of listening, so I'm sorry if you've already answered this question, but can you clarify if all paper products, including the toilet paper and paper towels, needs to be of recycled content for purchasing? And then can you also clarify if the purchase of biochar from thermal processing of biosolids would also count for their procurement requirements?
Sure, I can address the biochar question, and biochar isn't one of the is not one of the products that we identify in the regulations. So the answer is no to that. The procurement requirements out, when we were developing the requirements, we identified through outreach to stakeholders and Air Resources Board and other agencies some specific products that needed the most market help that would most directly result in landfill diversion, a new landfill diversion. And that led to our selection of this limited list of products. And biochar was not one of them at the time. On the paper products, including toilet paper and paper towels, I believe Michelle can answer that, but I think we're aware of this. We've received this question a number of times recently, and we're hoping to provide further guidance in the near future.
Yeah, great question, Annika. And yes, that is one that we do want to provide a little bit more clarification on in our webpage resources. Regarding our list of products that do need to meet these recyclability and recycled content requirements, I would say that it would be best if you do consult with your local procurement officer who is in charge of, local entities are already required to meet a lot of these recycled content requirements, and so they are aware of what types of products may need to come into play to meet these additional requirements of recyclability. So I would encourage you to chat with your procurement officer. But But yes, that is a question we've gotten, and we'll be providing more guidance on our website about that. Thank you. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Great. The next question is from Lisa. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I will go ahead and ask the question. Is there a list of permitted facilities that process mulch and compost?
Hi, yes, CalRecycle does maintain a database called the Solid Waste Information Systems. I can drop the link into the chat here. It also includes information for solid waste facilities, transfer stations, composting, investable digestion sites, and you can narrow that down by county and operational status. So I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat.
And to add on to that, thanks so much, Kristen. And to add on, yeah, and the regulations, they do specify exactly what types of facilities, mulch and compost, that they would need to be produced at in order to be eligible. So do take a look at that regulatory text as well. But the database that Kristen mentioned will be very helpful in identifying facilities.
All right, thank you, Scott, Kristen, Michelle, for your presentation and for responding to all of your questions. With that, I think we're going to close out the procurement Q&A session and move into the collections presentation, which I will be doing. So I will get going on that right now. Okay, so today I'm going to be providing a high-level overview of the collection requirements. Jurisdictions are required to provide an organic waste collection service to all residents and businesses. This is what we refer to as automatically providing service or universal service. The resident or business is automatically provided the service rather than having to subscribe, and the resident or business must participate in that service unless they have been granted a waiver by the jurisdiction. Jurisdictions can comply with the regulations by providing a 3+, 3, 2, or single unsegregated container service. They can also use a combination of services. A 3 container service requires a jurisdiction to provide each generator with a green, blue, and gray container. The green container is for the collection of organic waste. Blue is for the collection of non-organic recyclables, but may include paper products, wood and dry lumber, and textiles. And the gray container is for all other non-organic waste. A jurisdiction may provide additional containers or split containers for further source separation. A jurisdiction may allow use of plastic bags or compostable bags to collect food waste in the green container if the facilities the jurisdiction uses to recover the organic waste provides written notice to the jurisdiction that it can process or remove the plastic or compostable bags. In a 2-container collection service, a jurisdiction may either provide a green and gray container or a gray and blue container. Under a gray and green container service, the green container is limited to organic waste only, and the gray container allows for the commingling of all other collected waste. Under a blue and gray container service, the blue container is limited to traditional recyclables and may include paper products, wood and dry lumber, and textiles, and the gray container is for all other collected waste. In both scenarios, the contents of the gray container must be sent to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. In an unsegregated single container collection service, a jurisdiction may provide a gray container that allows for the commingling of all waste. The contents of the gray container must be transported to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. CalRecycle will use RDRS data to identify these facilities, and this information will be provided to jurisdictions. If a high diversion organic waste processing facility has an organic content recovery rate less than the 50% required by 2022 or 75% required by 2025, for 2 consecutive quarterly reporting periods or 3 quarterly reporting periods within 3 years, then that facility will not qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility. If a jurisdiction is in violation due to its high diversion facility being out of compliance, the jurisdiction will be subject to the enforcement process. And in this scenario, the jurisdiction must commit to one of 3 options: bringing the facility into compliance, using a different high diversion facility, or must implement a 3-container collection service. In the 3 and 2 collection services, container collection services, jurisdictions are required to monitor containers for contaminants. Contamination monitoring must be done for residential and commercial routes. A jurisdiction can monitor contamination by conducting route reviews or waste evaluations. Jurisdictions that choose to conduct route reviews must review all hauler routes annually. Containers may be randomly selected along a hauler route, and cameras can be used to remotely monitor containers. Upon finding contaminants, the jurisdiction must notify the generator of the violation. Note that the regulations do not require a jurisdiction to impose administrative civil penalties on generators who are in violation of the container contaminants requirements. However, the regulations do allow jurisdictions to impose contamination processing fees or penalties for contamination. Waste evaluations are a facility-based container contamination compliance method. This is the alternative to conducting route reviews. Evaluations must be done at least twice per year and must occur in 2 distinct seasons. The evaluations must include samples of each container type, so all container colors, and the samples must be taken from different areas in the jurisdiction that are representative of the jurisdiction's waste stream. The regulations specify the minimum number of samples from all the hauler routes that must be included in the evaluation from each container type. If the sampled weight of container contaminants exceeds 25% of the measured sample for any container type, the jurisdiction must either notify generators on the sampled routes of their requirement to properly sort, or perform a targeted route review of containers on the sampled routes to determine the sources of contamination, and then notify those generators of their obligation to properly sort. Note that a jurisdiction that is implementing a performance-based source-separated collection service must conduct waste evaluations at least twice per year for the blue and green containers and once per quarter for the gray container. The regulations standardize container colors. The color scheme is either the lid is the required color, or the body is the required color and the lid is the required color, or gray or black. A jurisdiction is not required to replace functional containers that do not comply with the color requirements prior to the end of the useful life of those containers or prior to January 1, 2036, whichever comes first. If a container has minor repairs and remains functional, it does not need to be replaced prior to 2036. In 2022, a jurisdiction must place a label on each new container or new lid provided to generators. A jurisdiction must either place labels on the body or lid of the container with language, graphic images, or both that indicate the primary acceptable and prohibited materials for that container, or the jurisdiction must provide imprinted text or graphic images on the container body or lid that indicate the primary acceptable and prohibited materials for that container. The labeling requirements apply to all containers, such as dumpsters, carts, debris bins, and roll-offs in the residential and commercial sectors. Organic waste generators must comply with local requirements by either subscribing to the organic waste collection service provided by the jurisdiction, or self-hauling organic waste in compliance with the regulations. Commercial businesses must provide containers for the collection of organic waste and non-organic recyclables in all areas where disposal containers are provided for customers except restrooms. Businesses must provide collection containers that conform either to the colors of the jurisdiction's collection service or have the required labels. Businesses must prohibit employees from placing organic waste in the wrong container and must periodically inspect containers for contamination. Generators are allowed to manage organic waste on site or use community-scale composting activities. Commercial businesses, including multifamily dwellings, must provide or arrange for organic waste collection services for employees, contractors, tenants, and customers. This includes supplying and allowing access to an adequate number, size, and location of containers with the required labels or colors. Businesses must annually provide information to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers about organic waste recovery requirements and properly sorting material, and must provide information to new tenants before or within 14 days upon occupation of the premises. Businesses must provide access to their properties during inspections by the jurisdiction. The regulations allow jurisdictions to grant waivers to generators from the collection requirements. However, jurisdictions do not have to allow any of these waivers. Jurisdictions, not haulers, must administer the waivers. Waivers must be reviewed every 5 years by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction may issue a de minimis waiver to a commercial business if the business is generating a de minimis amount of organic waste. De minimis amounts of waste are less than 20 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate 2 cubic yards or more of total solid waste per week, and less than 10 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate less than 2 cubic yards of total solid waste per week. A jurisdiction may issue a physical space waiver to a commercial business or property owner if the jurisdiction has evidence demonstrating that the premises lack adequate space for any of the organic waste configurations. Finally, a jurisdiction may provide a collection frequency waiver, which allows a generator to subscribe to bi-weekly collection of its blue, gray, or both containers if the generator is using a service that requires the placement of all organic waste in the green container. A jurisdiction may issue the collection frequency waiver for the entire jurisdiction, specific areas of the jurisdiction, or an entire neighborhood. A jurisdiction may apply to CalRecycle for a waiver to waive some or all of the collection requirements. A jurisdiction may apply for a low population waiver if the jurisdiction disposed of less than 5,000 tons of solid waste in 2014 and the jurisdiction has a total population of less than 7,500 people. Census tracts located in an unincorporated county with a population density of less than 75 people per square mile also qualify for a low population waiver. Low population waivers must be re-evaluated by the department every 5 years. CalRecycle must grant a rural exemption if a jurisdiction qualifies as a rural jurisdiction under AB 1826 and adopts a resolution finding that describes the purpose and need for the exemption. The duration of the rural exemption is December 31st, 2026. After that, jurisdictions may apply for the low population waivers if they meet the criteria. CalRecycle may grant an elevation waiver to a jurisdiction if the entire jurisdiction is located at or above an elevation of 4,500 feet. Census tracts located in the unincorporated county that are located at or above 4,500 feet may also apply for an elevation waiver, and the census tract may be partially located at that elevation. Elevation waivers exempt generators from the requirement to separate and recover food waste and food soiled paper. High elevation jurisdictions are not required to provide generators with containers, as those generators may continue to use their own customer or hauler provided containers that fit into their locked bear boxes. CalRecycle will provide forms, guidance, and training in May or June so that jurisdictions can submit their waiver requests starting in September. The regulations establish conditions under which disaster and emergency circumstance waivers to temporarily dispose of organic waste may be granted by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction is not required to separate or recover organic waste removed from homeless encampments and illegal disposal sites. The regulations also outline 3 requirements that must be met to allow a jurisdiction to dispose of a quarantined organic waste. And these regulations do not require generators, jurisdictions, or other entities to manage or recover organic waste that federal law explicitly requires to be landfilled, such as solid waste from international flights. Counties and each city, regional agency, and special district that provides solid waste collection services within each county must plan for adequate capacity for recycling organic waste. Each county will lead this effort. The county is responsible for establishing a collaborative approach to planning, collecting organic waste recycling capacity planning information from each jurisdiction, submitting the organic waste recycling capacity report to CalRecycle, identifying any jurisdiction, including itself, that does not have enough capacity for recycling organic waste, and informing any jurisdiction that does not have enough capacity, the timeline for submitting its implementation schedule to CalRecycle. Capacity planning efforts must include food, green waste, landscape and pruning waste, wood, paper products, digestate, and biosolids. And that concludes my high-level overview presentation of the collection requirements. So we will go back to the Q&A session. So on the screen is a quick reminder of how the Q&A sessions have been working. So you can submit your question to the SLCP inbox if you're watching via the broadcast, or type your question into the question pane if you're using GoToWebinar. And we will unmute participants as questions start to roll in. And if we cannot get to your question today, we will respond to you at a later date. So with that, we will go over to the first question. So it looks like the first question is from Priscilla. So one moment while I get over to your name. Okay, so Priscilla, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hello, I was just wondering if jurisdictions are only allowed to provide waivers and not haulers.
Yes, that is correct. Only jurisdictions can administer waivers, not private entities.
Yeah, and just to add to that point, however, what would happen is I think the haulers could provide the jurisdiction with information, particularly maybe it's about a commercial customer and that commercial customer is, at the de minimis threshold. So your jurisdiction is certainly going to play an important role in the waiver process in providing information, maybe even helping with verification out in the field.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the next question is from Susan. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. I will go ahead and ask Susan's question. How much is minimal organic waste that would qualify for a waiver?
So I can go ahead and start with that question. So for a de minimis waiver, which is what I assume you're asking about, I can go ahead and just read off that threshold again. And if you have a follow-up question, we can definitely get to that as well. So de minimis amounts of organic waste are less than 20 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate 2 cubic yards or more of total solid waste per week. And de minimis amounts of waste are also less than 10 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate less than 2 cubic yards of total solid waste per week. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, sorry for the delay. So the next question is from Kike. Kike, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, this is Kiki. I have a question in regards to the minimal contamination question, in which how are universities or large institutions going to be monitored for this? Will it be on the hauler only? Will they, you know, for us, we have many buildings on campus, so how would that work?
That's a great question, Julie. I'll start and you can feel free to add on. So for non-local entities and local education agencies, they are responsible for monitoring contamination and educating employees. So you have that aspect of it. For material that is collected, that hauler would be, if they're doing route reviews and are randomly, you know, reviewing containers, they might randomly select, say, that campus container to look at. But particularly for non-local entities and local education agencies, there's a big focus on really getting to where the waste is generated and educating those folks if contamination is happening.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. The next question is from Stacy Cuevas. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I was curious if there is or will be any guidance on waivers for space constraints.
Yeah, can you kind of give us a little bit more information? What kind of guidance would be helpful?
Well, you know, so for new construction, we're building this in. They need to have space for all 3 streams.
Right.
But for existing facilities, say you have 2 apartment complexes that are very similar, 5 units each, but there's cars everywhere. Oh, we only have room to park vehicles. We can't put another bin in. One of those apartment complexes may make that argument, but the other does not. So I'm just curious if there's a way for us to be consistent in maybe some criteria that would help to ensure we're not treating very similar facilities in different ways.
Yeah, I'll start, Julian. You can add. You know, this aspect of the regulations is up to the jurisdiction to set kind of what your parameters are. So particularly when it comes to physical space, you know, what I think you would want to do is decide, you know, what are the parameters, and then you can apply those parameters to all of the generators. So, you know, deciding as far as, you know, what is reasonable for a physical space waiver, you could set that guidance. So it is going to differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and we built the regulations to allow that flexibility.
Okay,
if there's any peer matching you want us to do, like what other jurisdictions are doing, feel free to send a note to the SLCP inbox, and we can have some team members pull together some information on what other jurisdictions are doing if you want to some info on that.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Up next is Mirelli. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I will go ahead and ask the question. This is regarding contamination monitoring for indoor containers for businesses. For contamination monitoring requirements, do indoor containers also need to be reviewed for route review waste evaluations?
Julia, do you want to do that one, or do you want me to?
I can take it.
Great.
So only external containers that the hauler is picking up and collecting need to be looked at for route reviews or waste evaluations. However, commercial businesses are required to periodically inspect containers that are provided indoors and provide information to their employees and customers about properly sorting that waste.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. The next question is from Debbie. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello again. So we're in a beach community, and we have homes side by side. They don't have any more room for an additional container. And when I've asked this question before, I've been told, well, just change the collection type, but that may not be, you know, feasible in our area to have, you know, different collection containers and a processing of it. So are there going to be any waivers for situations where the home, the resident, does not have room for additional bins to do this organic processing, organic collection?
Can you clarify, does the resident currently have a 3-container collection service or not?
Our city does, but this is in Sunset Beach. They have 2 bins right now. They have a black and a recycle, but their homes are so close together, they have no yard. So it's in their garage, and they definitely don't want a 3rd bin.
Yeah. So we are currently developing some information. So stay tuned for that. And we will have guidance on whether or not residential waivers can be issued, and also, you know, how jurisdictions are dealing with space constraint issues. We've started to develop some guidance or information on how different jurisdictions are handling it. So we'll be getting out more information. If you're on the SLCP listserv, as we develop new FAQs, you'll be notified.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kara. The next question is from Sean. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, I will go ahead and ask the question. Have there been any estimates made regarding the average amount of organic waste in, I think that's zones, but zones that require processing capacity infrastructure to be developed in order to be handled to meet with the goals of SB 1383? If so, have these been considered per county, or will this fall on individual counties to determine the infrastructure required?
I'm not sure, Julia. I totally understand the question, but as Julia noted, in April and May, we will be rolling out with tools to help counties and individual jurisdictions to calculate their estimated organic waste and edible food disposal. And so that tool will enable you to estimate how much will be disposed during certain periods of time, depending what that reporting period is. And then the tool will be set up so that you can input the verified either existing, new, or planned capacity that you've identified for either organic waste or edible food. And that then will enable you to determine what is the additional capacity that you need to plan for. And if you already have an idea of where that's going to come from, like you've verified we're expanding this facility, or this facility is going to take our waste, then you would be able to put that into the calculator. And then it would be the amount of material that may be left over that you don't know where you have capacity. And that's what would trigger an implementation schedule, whether that's for edible food or organic waste, that you would need to submit after the county submits its first report, which will be next August of 2022. And as we talked about, that implementation schedule would lay out a plan as to how you would secure the necessary infrastructure, whether it's organic waste or edible food. Julie, is there anything else you want to add to the response?
I think the only other thing I would add is that CalRecycle, I think this is maybe part of the question, has estimated that we might need anywhere between 50 and 100 new organic waste recycling facilities to handle all of the capacity that's needed throughout the state to recycle all the organic waste. And of course, that number is dependent upon the capacity of the facilities that come online, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, certainly our SHRIA, some of our regulatory documents determine the economic impacts of the regulations. We did do some regional modeling, but it's very much statewide kind of regional estimates. So I'm not sure how helpful that would actually be.
Kara, and I could add on really quickly. So we did release an update on the infrastructure and market analysis for SB 1383, but again, like Kara mentioned, that was statewide. We do have some research in there. I guess it's by sectors, but it is statewide. It's not by county at this point, like specific county. If I'm remembering the numbers right, and I may be wrong, but I could put the link for the report in there for you, Sean. But I believe to meet the 2025 goal, we needed like capacity for 18 million tons, I believe, of organic waste. Right now we have 10 million, or that's what we're estimating we'll have in 2025. So we do need to find capacity for around 8 million more tons. And that's using composting and anaerobic digestion facilities as well as I believe some chip and grind, but I may be a little bit off on that one. But we could send you that report too if you want to have a look at that. But by counties, like Kara said, the capacity planning tool is probably your best option, but we do have a statewide estimates and projections for 2025. Thanks, Kara.
Ashley.
The next question is from Mary Lou. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. I will go ahead and ask the question. How would SB 1383 affect federal entities such as Navy bases?
I can take a stab at this question, and then Kara, you can chime in. So federal entities are required to comply with the regulations by either subscribing to a collection service or self-hauling their organic material to a site that meets the requirements of the regulations. However, jurisdictions, they're not required to enforce on these entities, of course, and that will just be CalRecycle's responsibility. Jurisdictions are required to provide education to non-local entities, which is what a federal facility would be defined as under the regulations. But again, CalRecycle would handle any enforcement.
Mary Lou, let us know if that answered the question. So again, organic waste requirements, no edible food recovery requirements.
I don't think she has access to a mic, but that was about. Oh, she got it. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary Lou.
Last question.
All right, this is just a reminder to you that we are here until 4 o'clock. So if you do have additional questions on the collection requirements, we are here to answer those.
So, Julia, I do have a question that Jennifer Wallen wants to provide. So if and it's a question we're going to turn to HF&H to help answer about multiple haulers and setting up agreements with haulers. Jennifer Wallen, are you able to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Okay, thank you, Kara. I'm Jennifer Wallen. I'm a section manager with CalRecycle with our local assistance group, and we work with LA and Orange County. So this is great to have the webinar today. We had some of our jurisdictions ask this question ahead of time, so we said this might be a good forum to answer it with multiple jurisdictions involved. We have, of course, jurisdictions that have more than one hauler. And so looking to how they might set up agreements if haulers have different, they might be using different collection systems or using different facilities. And if there's any tips on kind of the monitoring side, if you have those multiple haulers and those different systems that they might be using.
Okay, this is Tracy Swanborn. I will give that question an answer based on our experience. We're working with several jurisdictions that I think meet that scenario in which they have multiple service providers. So for example, a community that has a non-exclusive franchise agreement for commercial may need to develop a non-exclusive franchise agreement that includes multiple collection solutions because their service providers are going to rely on different types of strategies. So for example, we have cities that are and counties that are including options in that non-exclusive agreement. So they have language for a 3-container program and outline what is required for a hauler that's using that system in terms of the collection program, as well as in terms of the processing facility requirements. And then they'd also build in a 2-container system, and in some cases, even a 1-container system if your region has haulers relying on all those types of systems. It does certainly make your agreement more longer, but it does provide those haulers the flexibility, and that's perfectly reasonable. The regulations say that you can use multiple approaches, and so you don't have to get everybody to fit into one type of solution. There are also entities that we're familiar with up in Northern California as well as in Southern California that are looking at different approaches for different sectors. So for example, I'm thinking of a jurisdiction that's going to use a 3-container system for their residents and a 2-container system for their multifamily and commercial. So again, that franchise agreement, in this case, I'm thinking of an exclusive one, it's going to have 2 different types of programs described, a 3-container system for their residents and the requirements that apply to that both on the collection and processing, as well as a 2-container system for the multifamily and commercial. So the model franchise includes all of that language. You would just have to keep or pull the sections that apply to you. I guess one other little thing I want to mention is in the contamination monitoring requirements, if you include a 2- and 3-container system, you have to do the contamination monitoring. So you might build that language in for your companies that are doing that kind of collection program. But if you have a company that's only using a 1-container system, they are off the hook for the contamination monitoring. So that's another section where you would have to tailor it based on the types of systems that you're integrating. I think that's all I have to say. Kara, you have something else you want to add?
No, Jennifer, just do you think that helped address the questions you've been hearing from the jurisdictions?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to the Cerritos team for all the good work you're doing. Thanks, Tracy.
The next question is from Marielle. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question. I will go ahead and ask the question. Are the minimum waivers allowed to be issued to SF and MF residents as indicated in the FAQs? Per the regulation, it indicates it is only for commercial business.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's currently under review, and I don't have an answer for you today. As soon as we do have an answer on that question, we will update our frequently asked questions, and a message will go out on the listserv when those questions have been updated. So if you're on the SLCP listserv, you'll get a notification when that's been updated, but I don't have an answer for you today.
And I'll just add that I believe we did remove that FAQ from the webpage. So as Kara mentioned, once we do update it, we'll repost it and send a listserv notice.
Great. The next question is from Ariana. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi all, thank you so much for providing this. Are there any plans to provide guidance for determining businesses that may be granted de minimis waivers? Or is it expected that jurisdictions should perform a waste audit on every single business that may be near the 20-gallon minimum?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I am going to have Alan pop in because part of this is with respect to enforcement and what's required in Article 14. Jurisdictions are required to verify every 5 years, both de minimis and physical space waivers. So Alan, do you mind adding some clarity to this one, please?
Yeah, I was in the middle of typing up an email here. That might be, Trisha, are you on there? You might be a little bit more suited to answering this on your end for the de minimis. I know that we had conversations regarding this.
Sure, I can jump in. Well, I know, Kara, you said you were going to be providing some more guidance in the future, but I would say that you don't have to perform an audit on every business, and that may be near the 20-gallon minimum. I would think that it would be more of a request from the business. Would that work, Kara?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. So the language in the regulations.
I'm not getting it. Yeah.
Okay. So the language in the regulations is at least every 5 years from the date of issuance, you do have to verify through inspection that commercial businesses are meeting de minimis and physical space waivers for compliance with the physical space waiver over in section 18984.11. The regulations and in our statement of reasons, et cetera, don't specify how those inspections are conducted. But it would be important that in some manner you are conducting that verification. So, you know, it relying upon, for example, you might initially have a business submit a waiver request, but at some point, for example, you would want your hauler to verify that in some manner. So if there's a physical space issue, right, there is certain documentation that the business needs to provide to you to demonstrate that. Same thing, you know, you might have your hauler verify if a business is saying that it has a de minimis need. The hauler could help determine that they are below either the 10 or 20 gallons, depending on how much total trash, recycling, and organics they generate each week. So I hope that's helpful. There is flexibility for you, but it does require verification every 5 years through inspection.
Thank you, Kara.
Great. And the next question is actually from the SLCP inbox from Kimberly Nilsson. The question is, in the regulations, there is language that allows an agency to recoup the cost of implementing SB 1383, just like AB 939 had. Has CalRecycle come up with a sample language an agency can use to recover these costs?
Tracy, do you want to help out as far as what we might have in the model franchise agreement, for example?
The model franchise agreement includes certainly some concepts around generating funds through things like an addition of an SB 1383 fee that you would assess on your franchise and non-exclusive franchise haulers, so that you might estimate what your additional costs would be as a jurisdiction to implement and monitor and enforce the program, and then incorporate that cost into your franchise agreement as an annual payment, so that you're recovering those costs through your rate payers. We also included a similar concept around food recovery program costs. We did some survey of some existing agreements, again, franchise agreements that included some food recovery fees to generate some monies to help cover those costs.
Did that help answer the question? I know we read it from the SLC inbox, but
So Kimberly is online.
Oh, great.
So if someone could unmute her and let her know when she's unmuted to see if that does help.
Yeah, Kimberly, you're unmuted. You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you need any clarification.
Hilton Farnkoff Hudson for fantastic sample documents. I just love them. My jurisdictions love them. Yeah, we were just looking for specific language that might be put into a municipal code versus the franchise agreement. That's all we were looking for.
In terms of what type of mechanism are you thinking about? Like a per unit generator fee that could be assessed, like we've seen agencies do for, say, HHW fees, that kind of approach?
You can do it that way, or you could do a percentage of, like the franchise fees. You could do a 1383 fee based on percentage. Either way, I was just wondering if you guys had anything like that.
No, I mean, you could adapt the language that's in the franchise agreement and probably integrate it. We are seeing a lot of agencies move away from those percentage-based concepts and moving towards a nexus-based type of cost for when they estimate those fees, so that they've got some tie into their actual cost, which might protect them under Prop 218 type of examination.
Right. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Thanks for the question.
There are no new questions at the moment.
So just a quick reminder again, if you have questions, please email the SLCP inbox or type them into the question pane. We do have until 4 o'clock. Oh, and a couple questions are coming in now. Okay, so we will go to Jessica next. One moment. Okay, Jessica, you are unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Let me pull that up. Sorry, the email thing was rejecting me. We just have some concerns. I'm with Athens Services, Jessica Aldridge. Do the same requirements for businesses strictly apply to all MFD accounts as well, including the start date for accepting organics waste, including food? I assume so. but there's not a lot of differentiation between MFD and commercial when we talk about businesses. And that's extraordinarily important for us when we're going out and having to implement this. So is there additional information and tools available specific to MFD, multifamily dwelling, not coupled with commercial in general?
Kara, I'll just chime in quickly on the model ordinance, because there are some specific requirements in the regulations around things that commercial businesses have to do in terms of providing containers inside their premises, and a few other minor little things that just apply to businesses and not to multifamily. So you'll see some differentiation in the model ordinance about what applies, or is it when more specifically when multifamily are excluded from a particular commercial requirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great add. Does that help, Jessica, answer your question?
No, it actually doesn't.
Okay.
I can read the file. I know what applies to commercial and what doesn't apply to MFD when it comes to upfront containers and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it would just be really helpful, I think, on our part, especially when more than 50% of our business accounts are multifamily residential, that it's a bit more outlined for them. This is a lot for them to digest. And information for restaurants, there's information for food recovery, but I think it would really be beneficial that MFD was specifically called out as a separate entity in some of the toolkit information, or toolkits per se, period, that would be available to them.
Got it.
This is Tracy again. We are seeing that some jurisdictions, like for example, when they create their model ordinance or when they develop their franchise agreements, that they create separate sections specifically for multifamily to describe the multifamily requirements, so that a multifamily entity could look at the code language and just look up multifamily and not have to sort of tease out how it fits in with the context of the commercial definition. And same for the franchises. We assist many jurisdictions in creating separate service requirements for multifamily and separate for commercial. And that is up to each jurisdiction as a preference. But again, certainly the basic requirements of, the multifamily does have to comply just like a commercial generator by January 1, 2022 with a compliant collection program where they need to self-haul. That's something that they all need to do, and that the edible food recovery requirements only apply to the commercial, tier 1 and tier 2 generators. So the multifamily are off the hook on that.
Yeah, and Jessica, if you're also after, specific education outreach materials that would be applicable to multifamily, is that also something you're asking for?
Yeah, anything that we would be able to provide them would be great. I mean, we have our own multifamily residential pilot program for food waste collection. We already implemented years ago, but it would be helpful, I think, for them to see that it's not coming from us, but also coming from the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those lines, if you want to, I'm not sure if you're speaking for a particular jurisdiction or multiple jurisdictions. So you could contact our Cerritos team, either Primo Nunez or Jeff Taylor, and we can get our team working on giving you some, model education outreach materials that seem to be working well with multifamily. The other thing I wanted to share is CalRecycle has begun its multi-million-dollar statewide education campaign for residents. And, this will be geared to both single family and multifamily. And this campaign is focused on taking a community-based social marketing approach, which is really changing people's behaviors. And we're focused on residents because we think that, businesses now, for many of them, have had a few years to deal with mandatory commercial organics recycling and, all of this kind of mandatory aspect. But residents, this is going to be really new. So that statewide campaign will be, we're right now in the development, the research and data gathering phase. Next fall, we will start to have more tools that are rolling out for jurisdictions and haulers. And then later this spring, we will have a training on community-based social marketing and the campaign for a certain number of jurisdictions. We'll only be able to do in this round a certain number, and we'll be working on how those invites go. But all of that, the training will also be available online as well. So I think that, you know, our efforts to have a statewide campaign, both for recycling organics and recycling right when it comes to beverage container recycling and other, you know, traditional, the blue container recycling, or 2 container systems, whatever your system is. So I think that statewide campaign is going to be really helpful, and we will also be targeting multiple languages with that statewide campaign. So I think in the coming year, you'll be seeing a lot more in the way of statewide messaging.
And I'll just add really quickly, on one of our new 1383 web pages, our collection web page specifically, we do outline the collection requirements, and we do distinguish between single family, multifamily, and commercial business requirements. So that's just another resource that we have available.
Thank you, Julie. I'll check that out.
Thank you. The next question is from Trevor. If you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for doing this, CalRecycle. This is Trevor Blythe from Economics. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to us down here. I had a question about, a lot of our client jurisdictions have developed AB 1826 exemption protocols that have verified that a certain account generates less than a half a cubic yard of organic waste. If during that verification process, we determine that the generator generates less than 20 gallons of organic waste, understanding the definition changes from 1826 to 1383, can that exemption carry forward into 1383, provided it's within that 5-year time period, or come January 1, 2022, that generator needs to be re-verified, even if we already know that it hits the de minimis threshold for 1383?
Yeah, Trevor, that's a really good question, nuance we've never kind of had brought up. So I'm going to go out on a limb, because I appreciate if you just verified this year that they have, say, less than 20 gallons of organics or recyclables. You don't necessarily want to have to go back out when the regulations take effect. So the way to handle that would be, if the jurisdiction allows for a more stringent waiver than what's currently allowed for in 1826, then as long as you meet the record keeping requirements and reporting requirements that are needed, you would be in fine shape. So I think that's what's probably important, is making sure that the record keeping data and all that's required for that you are compiling that. If you didn't, you'd have to probably come back, you know, in 2022 and gather all of that information. So does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. The next question is from the SLCP inbox, and it is from Allison. I am going to go ahead and unmute her to ask her question. Okay, I will. Oh, Allison, you can speak. You are muted. Okay, it sounds like no voice is coming through, so I will go ahead and read the question. Can you please review the requirements for mixed waste processing, refuse and recycle, collection relative to high diversion facilities?
Julia, you want to take that?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just restate what I said earlier. It's a mouthful, so hopefully this answers your question. So if a high diversion organic waste processing facility has an organic content recovery rate less than the 50% required by 2022 or the 75% required by 2025 for 2 consecutive quarterly reporting periods or 3 quarterly reporting periods within 3 years, then that high diversion facility will no longer qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility. So does that answer the question?
Allison is unmuted. I'm not sure if her audio is working.
Okay, let us know if that does or doesn't answer your question. You can shoot us an email and we'll see it.
Great, there are no other questions at the moment.
All right, I'll turn it back to you guys.
All right. Oh, I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
Since we have some time, I just wanted to go briefly through, if I could pull it up, all of the tools that CalRecycle currently has and all the tools and guidance that we are currently developing with some estimated timelines for you guys. And again, they're estimated timelines. It's always if technology and ADA compliance works with us. But again, all of this stuff will be sent out via the listserv once it is published. So as you guys know, Tracy Swanborn, HF&H team, along with their sub-consultants, help publish the model tools. So those are up online. We have an R3 local jurisdiction service rate study. So that helps determine organics rates. Mind you, this is pre-COVID, so there may be a little bit adjustment that you guys have to make on your end. We do also have case studies that HF&H helped develop, and we will continuously update as we have more case studies. We do have model signage and labeling up for the different collection container systems, and they're actually in different languages right now. So English, Spanish, Mandarin, Punjabi, Korean, and Russian. We have an SB 1383 overview PowerPoint and video. We're also working on updating the PowerPoint with more up-to-date talking points. And we're producing new videos right now too to help for a better understanding of the regs. So that is in production as well. We have California's climate strategy and the waste sector goals. It's a nice infographic with some history of the dates and where we are today. We have guidance on CalRecycle's SB 1383 compliance process. So that goes more into the notice of violations and corrective action plans. And it talks about our discretion in that document as well. As Julia mentioned, we do have a new 1383 revamped webpage. It has the web pages by topic, so collections, edible food, procurement, etc., and by audience. So if you're a jurisdiction, if you're a hauler, if you're a state agency, some of those pages we are still working on, but it does have a coming soon. So again, sign up for our listserv. We have the FAQs that have been brought up quite a bit today, but they're continuously being updated as well. We have a procurement calculator, so going back to the procurement presentation, and we just did a presentation on that yesterday. So that will be posted once we make it ADA compliant. So again, sign up for the listserv. Last but not least, we did just post local implementation examples, which we will continuously update, and we are looking for more examples on what you guys are actually doing boots on the ground. Right now, I believe we're featuring Oceanside and Palo Alto, but we're always looking for more examples, so please send them our way and we'll review them. If needed, but we did not publish, we also have JPA agreement guidance, so please let us know if you want that. Then up and coming, like I mentioned, we have training videos. I believe our first one is almost done, so that will be coming soon. As we mentioned throughout this webinar, we have capacity planning tools, which hopefully will be done in April, but I'm going to say second quarter of 2021. So there's the organic waste calculator, along with edible food, and they have multiple tools. So they have a calculator, a survey. Kara mentioned the Tier 1 and Tier 2 generator ID best management practices, and that may actually be released in a little sooner in March, like Kara mentioned. Then in summer 2021, we have the model implementation record keeping tool. So as you can see in 1383, record keeping is a big deal. There's a lot of aspects. So we want to provide you with a model electronic version of that. Also in summer 2021, we're going to have the department issue waiver forms. And then again in 2021, we're going to have route review best management practices. We're hoping this is going to include videos, but it's been a little bit delayed because of COVID and us not being able to really get out in the field and filming this. And then in late summer, early fall, we're going to have the Article 2 new technology review process and application, if you guys do want to have an Article 2 technology review. And then as Kara and this team have also mentioned throughout all of 1383, we're always going to be available to present at your board or council meetings or any other meeting for that matter, because we do know that this is a big push for 1383. I know some higher ups, they may not understand it because it is a lot of information. So we are happy to do these presentations for you. And then we do have 4 other regional webinars coming up. One February 18th for the rest of Southern California. So please join that one. We also have Bay Area, Central Coast, and Northern California. And then like Kara mentioned earlier, there is a private funding webinar tomorrow from I believe 9 to 12. And that's just not for 1383. It's for any recycling manufacturer infrastructure that needs funding. So again, it is about private funding. We did do a public funding one maybe last week or a couple of weeks ago. So that will get posted as well. All of the tools that we will be providing will have webinars to go through how to use the tool if you have any questions. So the plan is to release the tools whenever they are. And about a month later, we'll have a webinar to do Q&A and go through how to use the tool. So I just wanted to take that time to
Hey,
go.
Ashley,
Sarah, go ahead.
Can you do a plug for the CRA webinars too that we have?
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah. Okay. So on between February 23rd and 25th, we are, I guess, co-sponsoring in a sense or partnering with CRA to do kind of a mini 1383 webinar series. So this does not replace their annual CRA conference, which happens in August. But this one is going to be all focused on 1383. And I'm very excited about it. They're inviting a panel of a group. They're inviting panels of groups of local jurisdictions. I think there's some haulers and maybe some consultants potentially on there too. I can't remember the full speaker list, but it's actually talking about what people are doing now to implement 1383. You've heard CalRecycle speak so much that CRA wanted to bring what are locals actually doing to implement 1383 right now, or how are they prepping? So please sign up for that. It is on their website. There is a small fee, I believe, for non-members of CRA, but it is at the end of this month, and CalRecycle will be there to answer questions as well. But we do want to focus on implementation. Thanks, Kara, for the reminder. So it is 4 o'clock now, so I'm happy to see all the participants here, and we will get this posted as soon as we can with the ADA accessibility. Please bear with us in that aspect, but please sign up for a listserv. We will let you guys know when it is live and when all of those tools are live. So thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or the SLCP inbox, and we'll get you your responses as soon as possible. So thanks and have a great day.